I'm going to verify that.
Still
because I
eating
said it, I
chocolate
don't know.
chips.
Okay, welcome back. We had a much-needed break there. So we're back. I'm going to regress back to 332.
Oh,
Page 332. And policy, okay, to address public comment, our last public comment, I think, and I talked with the individual, and I think what we need to do is have a little bit more information and have a better informed discussion on that item. So we'll forward that to future discussion towards this.
that's fine. Like I said, I also told Mr. Martin that I'd be willing to meet with him moving forward to show him why I've stated what I've stated, and that the waterfront zoning extends into the water.
Yeah. So, okay, on policy LU 4.5, interim uses in the coastal zone. You know, this is getting back into Measure D area, and if we look back on that, it's. I think we need to clearly state that that use is not compatible with Measure D, or have a sunset clause to them, or can be subjugated to a higher and better use when it becomes available. So that we don't have the mission creep, and we don't have in the Measure D area. So this is strictly for the Measure D area.
And just to be crystal clear on when we're talking about the Measure D area, it's from Beach Street to the inlet building of the power plant
No, to
Target Rock.
to Target Rock,
All the way around.
all the way around the point. By the
Yeah, to the point.
yeah,
there at the cable
right
crossing.
there by the causeway.
Right,
they call it.
right.
Okay.
That is Measure D is defined in Measure D.
Okay, so but it doesn't include the power plant property. Is that
No.
right?
No, the power plant property has been sectioned out in Measure D as industrial use.
Okay.
So the
Gotcha.
other plant. So do I get three head nods on that?
I want to say that I think Measure D is relatively clear,
No, it's not.
relatively clear, and well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to be argumentative.
no, I get you.
But it's not. and the uses that are there because it is not. Some of the uses that are there.
If I can speak frankly, and you know, I've only been here a few years, so I mean, I didn't know this fishing this community as it was a powerhouse fishing community. I've known it as it is, which is mainly based in tourism. And I'm not saying that that's a better use. I think people spoke via referendum. In the Measure D is what they wanted, and and I know it would take a referendum to do something different, but I just don't know how viable it is going to be going forward, realistically.
Well, that's what we're saying. That's what I'm saying. That the uses have been allowed there that have crept, that are not allowed by Measure D, have crept and encroached on the Measure D area. So it just needs to have, when a higher and better use that's more appropriate for Measure D is available and feasible, then they need to be able to take precedent on the uses.
Right, that's what I meant. Okay, so I just don't know how enforceable that's going to be to force a business to close or force a use to cease when somebody wants to do something different. I just don't know how. I don't know how the city's going to have the teeth or the legal ability to enforce that.
Well, those uses have crept because they're not compatible with the Measure D. That's there. So their underlying permission is based, their use.
Oh, so because this is the implementation item, so you, yeah.
Appropriate for the underlying zoning and the underlying conditions that they apply.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think you talked me into it.
Okay, thank you. So I got.
So a couple things. That policy isn't meant to just apply there; it applies elsewhere in the along the waterfront. If you look at page 5-5 LU8, that's the implementation policy at the end in the yellow at the end. So 5-5 of implementation. LU8 land use.
Okay, yeah,
This is the implementing, section for that, so go ahead and take a look at that.
okay.
5-5.
So it's in the,
The table.
so it's in the table at the back. Yeah.
Made the letters too small.
That's how we made the plan smaller.
So the way I read that, Scott, that's basically for clearly, 30-day and less activities. Is that what that's
It's not
saying?
temporary uses. The idea, this came out of the downtown waterfront strategic plan, this concept. And so the idea was that there are quite a few properties, some of them were specifically identified in that plan, that are either vacant or underused, and that it would make sense to allow these more interim uses until there is a more long-term, permanent coastal dependent use there.
Are you looking at LU8?
So the implementation action LU8,
Yeah,
yeah, that's
5.5.
so that goes with policy 4.5. LU 4.5.
Okay, but that doesn't address, it still doesn't address the mission creep and the use creepage that we have in the Measure D area. This is clearly temporarily permitted, such as swap meets and, and.
So this is the first time the question of how does this apply in Measure D has come up that I remember. So I'm not disagreeing that I think that may need to be fleshed out
Okay,
or
so,
even left
So-
out.
Yeah, so I guess, we can exclude it from this. I mean, it can be excluded, Measure D can, from this policy. Or you can look at the policy and say, it's okay if we add in X, Y, or Z. I'm just saying there's an implementation piece to it, so you should look, before we make any decisions on changing this, we should look and see what we're supposed to go do with it. That's why we were pointing it out.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so there may be a better spot to say this, but I think it clearly needs to be stated, because that was part of what came out of our joint harbor, working waterfront task force.
And we have some language like that in the zoning code, I think.
So am I clear that you're basically saying policy 4.5 would allow all these potential uses, temporary uses in the Measure D zone right now?
The way it's worded, these interim uses could be allowed.
Well, I'm looking at this, and again, always from a political standpoint. These interim uses, okay, playgrounds and thriving businesses that don't require structures, they would be difficult to remove, once entrenched.
So I'll give you an example. Right now, we lease space. I think Harbor leases, has a lease for one of the kayak rental places that operates off of Mother's Beach. They pull their trailer over there and they lease those facilities off. And so that can stop tomorrow. If there was a, Measure D dependent use that wanted to go there and we could make it happen, it could stop tomorrow and be given to them. So that's an example of, so if you prohibit all of them, then now we have a problem because we're doing that. And maybe you think, we shouldn't do that. Well, fine, that's okay too. But right now it is something that we do, and that's an example of one of those things that it's not a permanent use. It doesn't have a building that it's sitting in, and it's not the same parking space every time. It's just they can go over there and operate and lease their paddle boards and those types of things. Like people call them up and then they drive over there and here's your paddle board, and then they go walk down onto Mother's Beach and go out and paddle out into the bay. So they're they might be there for a couple of hours or whatever it is, and then they're gone. So
And their permit or lease, they have notice of the interim nature that arrangement, right? mean,
I don't even know exactly what it says because it's through the harbor department. I'd have to ask the harbor director exactly what that is. But I mean, they can terminate those things anytime. It's not usually for a, they can terminate it for cause, or if there's another use they can have. That's typically how they're written. But exactly what it says, I don't know. I'd have to look.
And then, so I would be willing to accept that because it's a business. But with respect to playgrounds, I could anticipate a lot of community members who would go and say, despite what a lease says, we, the community, would like that, 5-year-olds and less sandbox, playground, whatever, to continue to exist. And that would be difficult to remove from a,
So we have recreational components out there, right? We have a pathway that goes out there, both pedestrian and bike, and we have a basketball court and things like that. And then we have the surf camp set up out there, and there's
Yeah.
so we have a lot of these kind of things going on. I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
no, your
I
point.
guess I'm just pointing out things that we do now, and like, are those not okay or not?
Yeah.
I think largely you think those are beneficial and those are good things to have because some of them support tourists that are here, but a lot of them support people that live here. For things for you to go do, and some of them support both. So yeah.
No, I stand corrected because I got an image of carving out in the parking lot, in front of one of those restaurants, a little play area with funny little things. That's not the, that's not the idea. Okay. All right.
So Scott, let me rephrase. Let me ask you, where do we have this condition?
So one of the things, I know we have some Measure D language in this.
326 is where we included part of it
Oh, 326.
from the task force.
Oh, okay. 326.
The Harbor Advisory Committee Planning Commission group. So yeah, we did add in this draft some description of the process that you went through to better define Measure D. So page 326 has some of that information, and then the zoning code also has some of the more detailed regulatory side of that.
Yeah, which is module 3, which is the uses. Am I right?
Right, but I still didn't see any grandfathering or any sunsetting of uses.
For related to this particular policy, or
Right, related to Measure D, to specifically state that if a higher, and this is one of these were the terms we came out of the task force, was if a higher and better use came along, it had precedence for in the Measure D area.
So if I can kind of throw an example out. So what I'm hearing you say is that if like the paddleboard company that's at Mother's Beach, hypothetically, they wanted to start renting rods out of that location instead of paddleboards, that would be a use that might push the paddleboard company out. Am I hearing that?
It could be because it's for recreational fishing, which is allowed in the
for
Measure D
recreational
thing, which is a
fishing.
Measure D.
That would be a
compliant
higher
item.
use.
Or somebody's figured out how to raise otters, right there.
Yeah.
That have them, to basically give them the priority over somebody selling T-shirts. So that's kind of, that's an extreme example, but.
Well, but it does LU8 does limit, so we're not going to see hot dog trucks out there, right? I mean, that's what we don't want, right?
Right.
About non-conforming.
Well,
right?
Jerry, let me ask you, for instance, we had, one time we had a South Bay Wild.
Yeah.
We
And more
had
moved, I
a,
think it says, doesn't it?
business there.
That's one of the changes.
Dependent.
So I might have, I asked, sorry.
No, go ahead.
You want to continue, that's fine. So it is in module 3 of the zoning code. That the exact language of Measure D is in there because that's the implementation section, right? So we have that in there. And then also we've added language in there that says, that deals with the non-conforming issue. We've reduced the non-conforming standpoint as if you cease the non-conforming use for more than 6 months, then you'll lose it. It's a year in our current ordinance. And it also says you can't expand it and you can't move it. That's what we did. So that's what, and that's an edit. So the way the module 3 that's posted on the website right now is written doesn't say that piece, but the direction that we have from the planning commission is add that in. That edit is coming back to you once we're done with module 4. So that's where you get that. That's where you get the, hey, you're not supposed to move the things, and our non-conforming piece has been reduced down in half. So if you stop having the use, you don't get to always have it. You'll lose it after 6 months. And so that's where we've tightened and ratcheted down some of that stuff. Okay? So that doesn't get into what you think about this policy necessarily as it relates to Measure D. So the question is, are you okay with it or not? And do you think what I just told you goes far enough on the Measure D side of things for the non-conforming thing that you're talking about? Those are two separate items, but related.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to ask you with your little edit, like for instance, there's dockside number 3, I think.
Yeah.
The boat. That boat thing. So right now it's, I don't know. I think it's not. It's a different lease than to the dockside building. But anyway, if somebody came up and said, "Hey, I got a better use," then that can bump that out of there.
Yes.
And that's not what we took, and that's not what the planning commission said when you reviewed module 3 as far as the change goes. What we, one of the things in the change that we made in response to planning commissioner comments was we have the redevelopment of that lease site. That building's going to be demolished, and we're going to build a brand new building. Bob Fowler's the leaseholder right there, and there's going to and so what we did, what happened with that project is the restaurant use that was in that building got moved into the new building.
Right.
The change that the planning commission made says we're not doing that anymore.
Right.
You demolish the building, that use is gone, and you're going to have Measure D compliant stuff only. So we again, that's ratcheting it down, making it tighter, and so that's what we did.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So
I like that.
Yeah, and we all agreed on that.
Yep.
That's great. I guess I'm trying to push it a little bit further, and if I have any support on this, it was always, okay, so, let's say a hypothetical person comes in with an intended use and then expands an area further and further into the area where with an unintended use, basically restaurant space. Then somebody else comes in and says, "Oh, well, I want to land fish here. We've got a great squid fishery that's going, and I need this space to unload squid." Well, he can't do that because it's now a restaurant space. So this is where I think we need to be able to say, okay, well, while this guy's, at least while this guy's willing to land squid here, that they should have the priority to use that space.
So it involves lease spaces, and we have existing contracts and leases that create big problems with that, because you have an assigned lease, it's an agreement, and we've agreed to allow you to have the use there for X number of years, and so you run into, it's the whole, the business component that's down on the waterfront. We have leases for all of the leaseholders that are down there, and they include the uses that are on the site, and those lease terms are fairly long in many instances. So they can go away and they would go away with the non-conforming piece. But whether we can, I doubt very seriously because of that we could push Mark Tognazzini's outside restaurant. Sorry, Mark. With somebody, with adjacent use that wants to expand into that area because they do fish unloading and there, which they could want to have the larger. I mean, that's an actual example that could happen. They could say, "Oh, we could use, space along the waterfront there. We could use the whole 150 feet more, or 200 feet more, whatever it is." And then you'd be saying, "Okay, we can get rid of that, but we have leases in place that allow them to have it, and they haven't stopped a non-conforming use, so that makes it more difficult."
Well, okay, this is probably a problem with the lease mechanism. And I don't know if we can address it here or not, but those leases should only be allowed on a year-to-year basis when they are not Measure D compliant. They should not have long-term lease to have a Measure D a non-compliant Measure D usage in those areas?
I think you'd be stifling economic development down
Wouldn't
there.
get any restaurants there.
Well, okay, so we don't have a restaurant in the fish landing area. I mean, that Measure D area was not supposed to be for restaurants.
Well, one of the things, I talked to Mark about this before, and he said that
Mark
he.
disagrees on this.
Yeah, I know, and I don't agree totally, but I don't disagree totally either. I'm kind of like a little in between, because one of the things that he said that he tries to do is, he fish that come in, he has a fish market and stuff, so at least moving toward that compliance. But I think that if we just have a 30-day or a 1-year lease agreement, that's a hard thing to sell for people to invest in a business,
Okay,
any business.
I don't think these uses are incompatible. I mean, maybe we could have both. Maybe we could have a fish offloading in a restaurant type situation in the same building, mixed use, two stories.
So the issue, I'll give you the exact issue that you run into if we do this. So you have lease sites, and they're required to improve their lease sites every so often to get extensions on their leases. And so those improvements to those lease sites, like Bob Fowler's gonna, when all is done and said, he's gonna have spent $3+ million. I mean, that's a huge investment on the waterfront.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes that viable for him to put that investment in there is part of that is the restaurant use versus a commercial fishing use, and that's a long-term thing. So he doesn't want to lose that, because all of a sudden, if he doesn't have that, he's upside down potentially on his lease. And so if you do what's suggested, then the person that's redeveloping their lease site, and is like, hey, I got a tenant to go in here, and it's gonna continue this use, and we're gonna keep going, and he's counting on that revenue to pay off the loans on that thing. If you can all of a sudden kick that out because somebody wants to do something that's Measure D compliant, well, we've created a real problem for anybody investing in the community then down there if they're doing that. So that's one of the issues. Like, some of those lease sites have to redo it. The city could make the decision that if you do it, you just have to redo it and it's Measure D compliant, but you're gonna stifle that investment to some extent. So that's the issue that's raised as a result of the suggestion. I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent. Just saying that's the problem that you would see, and it becomes a disincentive potentially.
Yeah.
And sorry. I would just add that the restaurants that are in that area, they either predate Measure D, or for the ones that are there after Measure D, for instance, Dockside 2, they were previously found by the Planning Commission of that era to be compliant with Measure D because they were supporting the commercial fishing industry. Adding such a thing that would say, okay, maybe it's a year-by-year basis or it's an interim use, that would have to be set up at the onset, which is the sublease that restaurateur, I mean, it would be at the front end, it would be in the lease that you're on an interim basis, and at any time, you'd have to move. It would be a hard sell for anyone to go in knowing that at any point you could be asked to leave.
Okay, I know that this was a hard ask. I know that, and so I'll withdraw it, but it's just the whole idea of Measure D was to protect commercial fishing.
Yeah.
And at the time of Measure D, the primary infiltrator of that area was the day boats, and so that was one of the reasons why day charters were eliminated out of Measure D. Now the primary infiltrator, or is probably restaurants and bars. So restaurants and bars were not allowed to go back in there. So somehow we just need to be able to, either on a continuing basis or through this update, reaffirm that the primary consideration for the Measure D area is to have it for commercial fishing, and just reiterate that in all of our policies. So I'll pull back on on the sunset clause.
It's a good discussion. I mean, it's important and one that's, it's a hot topic. I mean, obviously, so I mean, it's important for you to weigh through and work through it. I mean, we want you to be comfortable when we're done.
I think it's an acknowledgement that when there's an abuse of some sorts, and just some of those restaurants that exist in the measured area are in some sense an abuse, but I realize they're an ongoing, viable, and maybe even necessary commercial activities. But it's really difficult to sort of turn back time and return to an earlier era because of the legality of it. But what concerns me, though, is that if the overall fishing industry continues to decline, frankly, if no other reason, there are just fewer fish out there, and the harbor master is faced with increasing vacancies and the need to sort of fill those spaces in some way, that there'll be an encouragement to have these interim things. And there could come a time when there are so many interim activities that in effect has changed the complexion of the Measure D area. So my question is, who is the harbor master the final arbiter of how many and which interim, or do we get to see it occasionally? Because there might be when we would say, yes, we like the idea of interim activities to fill in the holes, but you know what? There's just too many of them at this time.
So our lease agreements get approved by council. So those lease agreements, unless they're on a sublease, go through council. So, at the end of the day, yes, it's the harbor department that administers to the leases down there, meaning they manage them, but it's the city council that makes the decisions on who gets them and who doesn't, and whether that's an appropriate thing or not. And you raise an issue that the harbor department faces right now. They operate on a pretty thin line based on revenues that they get in. So, I mean, that's also one of the issues. You start eliminating some of those, high, tax generators for them. They start having, difficulties operating as a harbor department. So,
I'm not to belabor this, but what I just outlined, I'm not even that disturbed by that outcome, because what it means is if you can't fill those spaces with viable fishing activities, it means the industry has permanently declined, in which case, we're beating, as much as I love Measure D, we might be beating the dead horse. So we have to sort of in fact, I was going to bring that up, you have to periodically, whatever it is, every 5 years, look at the metrics to see, well, okay, how are we doing, boys? Do we continue down this road?
yeah, I mean, I think, the good thing about that is we look at it every year, and it's called the budget. They operate as essentially their own, like an enterprise fund, like sewer and water do. They take in money, and that's what allows them to operate inside of the harbor area, because they operate the leases down on the waterfront. The city does get the TOT for the hotels down there, though, because TOT is a separate tax process, but they get a portion of it too. They get some of the revenue associated with how much revenue is generated by the hotel room, so they get a bite of that as well. But
I was just going to also point out on the same page in the implementation table, there is LU7, which is update the fishing community sustainability plan every 5 years, which goes to your point.
And I just want to kind of bounce off what Joe was saying. If we're, because what we're doing is we're projecting, we're future tripping, out with these policies, and with the ocean health and ocean acidification and hypoxia and harmful algae blooms, all these things are going to be, especially in California, they're going to be a real environmental concern. So the decline, or like the moic acid, for instance, is found in just recently they had that issue with certain fish. Having that area open, maybe to not necessarily not only like what you've mentioned here, but scientific research, or have it where the colleges or the universities can get involved in there and maybe get some funding, grant funding in there, so we could use that Measure D. It could be a bridge between the commercial fishing industry and maybe even hiring commercial fishermen to do water testing and to do that thing, so we can have that bridge in that area that will allow a cross-training for people that are losing their, trade and profession.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry, Mike.
I was going to say, I'm very much in support of Commissioner Lure's comments. My biggest concern is that this is a unique condition. The shore of a harbor is a unique condition, and we have to have a mechanism, since this is a document that's going to span X number of years, something that controls the thought of what we intend the uses to be. So if we've got a land use policy and we've got a law that says that part is supposed to be this, then we at least need something in here that gives us an excuse for why it's not like we think it says it should be in the law, which would mean periodic, interim, things like that. But it should talk about the advocacy of the city through the plan is that's commercial fishing. And if it doesn't say that, and if this is an asterisk, interim use and coastal plan, I just think it should be clear so that people understand. I would love to see somebody come up with sustainable fish farm or something that works in the area that's by the edge or something. I don't know what it would be either.
Well, we have a oyster farm and an oyster culturing area right there in the Measure D area.
I just know, going down to Avila with my students quite a bit, that waterfront looks totally different at their working harbor than ours does.
Right.
Because they have the lift facility, they've got the boat yard. It's an amazing thing to see. And I'd hate to see us lose capacity to have those types of things that belong here without some really specific language about, we'll let you in for now. So I'm very much in sympathy with Commissioner Lure's comments.
Okay, Scott, so where do we go with this?
I don't think there's any reason to get rid of the policy because the policy applies to the rest of the waterfront.
Right.
So, if you want to suggest removing it from the availability in Measure D, we can do that. If you want to suggest that only some of the things in there would be allowed in Measure D, we can take dots and make them numbers and refer to, in the description portion of it that's there, say, and these items 6, 7, and 8 apply to Measure D and the rest don't, or whatever. If you think that, if you say some of those are okay and some of them aren't, you can do that. If you just want to eliminate the whole thing and say it doesn't apply to Measure D, we can do that. Do you have any other?
Or you mentioned
Sounds like a lot of
what we agreed to already with Measure D, that language with regards to, you're talking about just interim uses.
We're really just doing the interim use policy, and I think it applies to the waterfront. We don't have to apply it to all the waterfront. We just apply it to a portion of it. But if you think some of these are viable, then we can just take those ones and change dots to numbers and say number 1, 2, and 3 apply to Measure D and the rest don't. So those are the two options that I could come up with. I'm open to others. It's just that's what I could think of.
I just wonder how does this, I don't want to extend the conversation to, again, another landmine zone, but what Mr. Martinez talking about, my understanding was those zones had been harbor use down there.
Correct.
And one scenario would be that those housing units are interim uses, that we've just assumed they're going to be there in perpetuity. But in fact, this could apply to that too.
I would largely say that I understand what Mr. Martini was interested in. I would also say that I disagree with it. I don't think that was the intent. I think you could have commercial fishing operations down there. I think we had commercial fishing operations down there. I know we've had conversations other than that, but that's the reality of what's happened in the past. Now, I haven't been here that entire time. Mr. Martin's been here for a very long time, so I completely respect his opinion. He has the property down there and should be able to ask for whatever he wants. I would never, deny that of any property owner in town. I largely, am not super comfortable with that. All of what he was coming from. Some of the other things, we're going to do some research for him on, but.
Also, interim use is the way it's being used for this policy and this implementation action doesn't include a house. So just to make
just
that
set that's back
distinction,
here.
it's things that can be
Or restaurant.
relocated.
Yeah, it doesn't, yeah.
And there's a couple other ways that it's defined under LU8.
Let's see.
You know, Scott, I'm wondering, I'm trying to articulate my difficulty with this, and it strikes me that it's one of process, meaning the city council has the responsibility for governing the entire city, and the harbor master largely has a responsibility for generating revenues at the harbor, and we, the planning commission, are sort of the guardians of the Measure D area. You know, and I would like, well, okay, I would like any interim use of in the Measure D area to come before the planning commission.
Okay.
Now, that's probably, there's no place in this document, but
No, we would push that into the zoning code. That's where that would live. And that's actually probably, that's a decent solution for the area in Measure D. I mean, I think maybe the other ones, some of the interim uses might be short-term and approved by staff.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I don't know how we would sunset that, but I like that, yeah.
Okay, well, that's a change we can make. I think that we can add that clarity to it and push it out through zoning, which makes sense.
Okay, let me throw out another bomb here. Okay, I didn't see this anywhere in the plan or anywhere in our blueprint, but the Coastal Commission has a policy of continuous, uninterrupted waterfront access from Oregon to the San Diego. We don't have a section in here that states we should have continuous, uninterrupted access from the Rock to the state park. And I think that should be, we should have a section in here, and maybe it's in, you know, like policy, it should be in policy, 4.9 or something. But I'm not sure where it would fit in here, but I think we need to state that, just to be, if nothing else, to be consistent with the Coastal Commission, the coastal
Well,
plan.
goal LU7 is the vertical and lateral access goal, or the access goal. So we have policy LU 7.1 that could be revised.
4.6 policy LU 47?
That's on page 339. And then there are a lot of implementation actions related to this goal as well. But that sounded a little bit more like a policy level suggestion.
Yeah, okay.
Let's see. Chair Luer, you may also want to have some discussion on policy LU 7.5. So, and I know you and I have discussed this before with reference to 1001 Front Street, but that's the policy that says lateral public access along the waterfront revetment shall be provided in all new developments, et cetera, consistent with public safety needs. And it goes on, but that's
Right.
typically where you find the, we can't provide lateral access because there's commercial fishing in this area. And then the city's had a history in the past of routing lateral access around commercial fishing operations.
Right, and then also in policy LU 7.6, we need to include gates and fences in that policy. So, but this talks about the revetment area on the Embarcadero. I think, from my reading of the Coastal Act or the Coastal Commission policies, they're talking about, further past the Embarcadero, where you'd connect up to the state park, and then the state park would connect up through, to Baywood or, further
The whole
down the
city
way,
then.
and continuous. So.
That's why I was pointing to LU 7.1, because
Right.
it says an emphasis on the Embarcadero, but it does say the entire It
Okay.
could be revised to emphasize what you're talking about more.
That may be a good place for it, yeah.
Yeah. That works.
The reason it was worded the way it is because the existing connections are generally better outside of the Embarcadero, but obviously there are places like between Tidelands and Morro Bay Inn where it's not that great. But yeah. The intent of that section and that goal is to address the entire coastline.
Yeah, and seeing as we're talking about zoning in that area too, that should be implemented this time. Do I have agreement on that? Okay, great.
I have, did we go past 3-35? I think we are.
I think, well, we can circle back.
I have a,
335.
on page 3-35, the short-term vacation rental threshold.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a reference at the very bottom, however, if it accommodates 12 people, that whole business. Given the discussions, I think we should omit any reference to a vacation rental housing 12 people in this document. It seems to undercut the arguments we're going to make or have made.
We didn't get there yet.
So that's some analysis that we did in the memo on this topic. So this is excerpted from that.
I realize that. I
Yeah.
just,
Just to
yeah.
make sure
no,
it's not part of policy language.
Yeah, I would hate to have anyone quote that as a reason for having 12 occupants in a vacation rental somewhere in Morro Bay and all the problems that would incur.
Where's the bottom paragraph?
Some actually have more than 12.
But, well, that may be the case. I just, it's like encouraged.
Determine what was low cost,
I'd like that.
or how we could compare vacation rentals with other types of accommodations.
Got it. Yeah, I was looking at the wrong page.
But it's probably not critical
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay,
if that's going to be a lightning rod.
okay. So we got to strike out an agreement on that?
However, the 12, can you repeat that, Joe, again?
Well, it says
Where
if
it
it
says-
accommodates, they're making an argument as to how vacation rentals are a more affordable form of housing.
Yeah.
Which is true, but then they go on to say, and as an example, if it accommodates 12 people, it would actually cost $25, which is comparable, et cetera, et cetera. And what I'm suggesting is delete that as an example or replace it with something, but not one of the more egregious examples that we'd like.
And it's just a,
To me,
just a calculation. Go ahead.
Well, to me, it seems like we're gonna address that
Yeah.
in a different forum.
This is just illustrative of how you compare costs,
I-
is all this is. The policy is going to live in the zoning code. It's not going to be part of the overall zoning code update, though. I pulled it out
Yep, and
because
I-
we're never going to finish. We weren't going to finish it in time to meet our grant deliverables. But we are going to pick it back up. So yeah, I mean, if you want to delete that section, though, it's fine.
I understand that completely. This is, again, just kind of optics or public relations or an emotional, I just don't think, a situation that we'd like not to occur should not be seen in this document that's going to live with us for
And
20
it's in the
years.
low-cost accommodations memo where the entire analysis lives, so I think, I don't have a problem taking it out.
To be clear, this vacation rental ordinance or whenever we pick up that discussion, that's still going to be discussed in a later time. This is not.
Yeah. So the next, sure. The next opportunity you're going to have to look at that is when we're done with all of this.
Okay.
We had the outreach that I did with
Right.
with Councilmember Heading, and I have a summary of that documentation, and we're going to present that. I will present that to the Planning Commission.
Okay.
And get some input from you, and we'll let everybody that signed up for vacation rental notice know, and we'll have maybe a vacation rental forum for a meeting. I don't know, something along those lines, and take some more input and see if we can't put some draft language together and start moving it forward. It's just. I can't do both at the same time. I don't have
No,
capacity
no,
for
for
that.
sure.
So I pulled it out and said, hey, this is a hot button topic for the community and it deserves the appropriate amount of time. And I can't do both right now. So we'll do it afterwards. And I think right on the heels of it, though, because I've sort of promised that. So that's what'll happen.
Okay.
I just have one wordsmithing point on 334, and the first paragraph under short-term vacation rentals, I would just advocate taking the word success out and say expansion. Success seems to me to be a more of a affirmative thing, and I think expansion is more accurate in terms of its.
Which paragraph are we in?
The first paragraph under short-term vacation rentals is the first paragraph's overview, and then the next paragraph has highlighted short-term vacation rentals. One important piece of the modern accommodation market is the recent success, and I would just say recent expansion of short-term vacation rentals.
Any comments from the rest of you? Okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
All right, thank you.
And at this point, we're not making a difference here. It's in the fine-tune policy about the owner-occupied or owner.
Yeah, these are just generally talking about affordable accommodations because one of our grant deliverables is to do that. The last piece of that will ultimately be when we deal with the vacation. A portion of that will be when we deal with the vacation rental ordinance separately. But this is dealing with affordable accommodations, and we're required to have this language in here by Coastal because one of our grant deliverables. One of the reasons we got the grant was we were going to study this, and that's what we did.
So kind of circling back to Commissioner Gaffia's comment about the 12 people, are we going to change that to less than 12? Or
Well, that wouldn't be accurate because this is actually some calculations that we did in our analysis. So we'll have to look back at it. We'll make sure it doesn't say 12 people in this document, but it might just mean taking out that section or just rewording it so that it reflects our analysis but doesn't have that number in there. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to 338 at least. And so this is where I probably should have stated my comments before. This is the coastal access section. So we're getting into policy 7.1, 7.2. And then 7.6 with the inclusion of gates and fences, just like we talked about. And then on the implementation,
Everybody's good with the inclusion of fences and gates? Two of you, at least?
Sure.
Okay, thank you for nodding your heads and saying yes.
Just might be falling asleep.
7.1, so we're all good on adding a little bit of language as it greater emphasizes the accesses through the city, right?
right.
We're good. So I have one other person nodded their head. Can I get somebody else? Thank you.
Okay, trying to move it along here, but this is important too. And then, so the implementation on that is on like 5.8 and 5.9. So on page 5.8 in the yellow section or orange sections on LU 18. So this goes back into our Embarcadero, waterfront master plan. And so I'd like to see about an item D on 3 on lateral access to say connection to adjacent properties shall be planned for implementation on a system-wide basis and elevation changes are critical in that planning. So
Where are you?
something.
So we're going to add
Submitted.
three. We're going to add a D.
Yeah, LU 18 on page 5.8.
So can you state that again? I'm sorry.
Okay, something like this,
Oh, okay. You gave us. Amy was saying you've given this in writing. So
Yeah, right.
I guess we have it. So
You have that? Okay.
Do,
So-
yeah. Do we want to discuss with the group?
Yeah, so basically this means, when one property goes for development, like we saw down there before, that they need to be able to plan that the adjacent property, that the elevations match, because that's the biggest
And share the burden.
share of the burden on elevations.
right, so Roses and Libertine, we want to make sure when Libertine does develop, they can match up the Roses,
Right. Okay.
right? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, exactly.
everybody seems good with that. Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so then let me see if I can read my, okay, then exceptions, lateral act, then on the next page.
we're still in implementation.
Yeah, we're still in implementation. And so it's vertical access requirements. So the lateral access there, that's critical. And so this was one of the things that Dr. Teft tried to implement. And so in his memory, removal of existing structures shall not be considered as a basis for feasibility. So if somebody comes here and says, well, I can, we can't put a 10-foot walkway in there because there's an existing building, that should not be the basis to determine whether it's feasible or not. That if they can't figure out a different way to put a 10-foot walkway in there, then they should be required to remove portions of that building to make it so.
So the idea would then be, one of the impediments could be, okay, you need to put a 10-foot access way in here. And they said, okay, well, we're going to stick it out over the water, but we have eelgrass, so we can't.
Right.
All right.
So,
Just making sure we understand kind of where we're going, right?
so if they can't mitigate the eelgrass, then they've got to tear down a section of the building. This will solve a lot of they'll become much more creative, I think.
So this came up, we talked about this whole section a lot with the
Right.
GPAC when we discussed the memo that these policies, well, this comes from your existing document, but we had everything in that memo and then it came into the plan. So one issue that came up a lot was that conflict between industrial or commercial fishing uses and these goals. So I'm interested in hearing if anyone wants to talk about that, because it relates somewhat to to that comment.
We had, I'll impose my thoughts on this. We had actually a handwritten note on one of the plans that came from the Coastal Commission staff that actually stated that, lateral access shall be required except for during the term of active use of fish loading or offloading facilities. And it should only be obstructed by a chain across the pathway with a signage that temporary out of use. There should never be any permanent impediments. And this was handwritten on a set of plans that we saw before us. So something to that effect, I think, is an appropriate. So 30 minutes before activity and 30 minutes after activity, the lateral access can be closed, but other than that, it should not have a permanent impediment to it.
I like that. Just as it's practically enforced, I just don't see it practically enforced. So what could we do to more strictly enforce this? Because this isn't happening.
So we can, one of the things we're going to be talking with some of the folks down there about is, actually complying with their permits. For a very long time, one of our leaseholders down there didn't have their lateral access open. We made them open it up, and then now we're having a little bit of a problem with them, maintaining it open during, dawn to dusk hours, which is what they're sort of required to do. It's part of its enforcement. We found out that lease site was supposed to have that, and we made them open it up. They didn't have it open up at all before. So when we're, I think, sort of done going through all of this and finalizing it, we're going to be going down there along the waterfront and verifying compliance with all of the conditions of approval for these projects. We're also going to be doing that as part of the lease review. That's part of the lease policy updates that we'll be working on here, coming up here pretty quick with Harbor. Council has said they wanted us to do this when leases are up for review. And as part of when projects come, before them on precise plan, planning commission's asked for that as well. So certainly be picking them up as part of all of those things as well. So
I guess where I was going was, is there something we can give a code enforcement officer to give the city some teeth to enforce this more readily? without having to go through a lease review process? And, I mean, could this be a zoning code enforcement type issue?
It is, and actually, we've dealt with some of these issues over time with code enforcement officers. What we haven't done, and that's, again, a capacity issue until we're done with all of this, there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into this, is go through all of our lease sites and see what they're supposed to have and what they don't. We've done it on a kind of an ad hoc or as it comes basis, when issues have arisen, we've gone out and looked and said, oh, is that supposed to be there? Is Mark supposed to have the seating in all those locations? Do you have all the approvals for that? We had to verify that he did. He had all those approvals, I mean, he was right. Our initial look through our documents didn't show. Then we found the requisite permits and we're like, he went through the process, he's all permitted, as an example. So we've done that on an ongoing basis. And we have the ability to enforce permits right now. It's sort of how that initial thing came up on the
No further language is needed in here, is what you're saying. Yeah.
For
enforcement.
For enforcement, yeah. Scott, are you comfortable with the language we have and the enforcement capability you have?
I don't have an issue. I don't have an issue with it. I mean, like I said, we've made people open it up in the past, and I'm comfortable that some folks aren't currently complying. They need a little bit of a nudge and reminder, and that they'll get back into compliance once we do that. Okay. I don't have an issue with that because it was also pretty clear what Coastal expected when they were getting their approvals, and Coastal will be happy for us to do that work versus them having to go through their code enforcement folks. And we don't fine you as much as Coastal does if they find you in violation, so they'd probably be happier to have us dealing with them versus Coastal anyway.
Okay. I'm sorry. I actually found the wording that I had that
Okay.
Maybe this will help. I was going from memory before. So on item C, on that, it's after lateral access may, and then my wording would be may be temporarily restricted during time that activity, during that activity. No permanent barriers, i.e. fences, gates, or barricades shall be allowed. Areas may be restricted with movable chain and signage for no longer than 30 minutes prior to that activity and 30 minutes after that activity. So I paraphrased that earlier, so.
Yeah. Yes. Excuse me, you did provide that to me in writing,
Okay.
that language, and I did forward it to Scott and Amy, and in fact, Amy has it on her screen right here. So if there is a majority of the commission who agrees with Chair Lohr, then we can make that edit. Okay, I see unanimous. Okay. Oh, well, actually, Jesse stepped away, but four's good. Thanks.
One extension.
Yeah.
Okay.
Either one of you guys, can you expand a little bit on B on the same page, 5.8 or 9? Yeah, 9. B, it talks about exceptions.
See.
And it's subsection C under lateral access, and then subsection B, little b. If continuous lateral access across the bayward portion of the parcel is found infeasible.
It's referring back to the first item in that.
Yeah. So is your question about that continues to describe an in lieu fee for lateral access?
Mm-hmm.
To my knowledge, the city has never enacted or conditioned a lateral access in lieu fee. Every single waterfront project that I've ever been associated with or done research on, which is just about every single one, they've either provided it or there was some type of finding about why it was infeasible, such as this is a commercial fishing operation. Even when there were elevation changes, like at the Salt Building, they put in an ADA lift. So, but yet I suppose it's a placeholder from our current code, which does give someone that option that if there was some type of, topographical or site constraint where it just could not happen, then you had that backdoor option of conditioning an in lieu fee.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the in lieu fee would be based on, we could look at a similar lease site that put in the lateral access, determine what what the cost of that was, and then you can, by CPI or ENR, raise the percentage from the year that it was done to then and have a number for it. So. And they have to give us that information because you have to justify the amount you spend on your lease sites to get your expanded lease in Harbor, so we actually get that information.
Oh,
So
okay.
you might not otherwise have that, but we get it because you have to prove that you expended X number of dollars for your lease to get lease terms that extend, up to 50 years. So.
I'd like to return to something that Chairman Lohr about the construction obstacles on the lateral access. I think it really revolves around a notoriously weasel legal word, feasibility, which they mention here. Physical, in exception 1A, they mention physically infeasible. But the interesting thing is that when you look at the definitions, they define economically feasible, technically feasible, but they don't talk at all about physical feasibility, okay? So what I'm suggesting is that hasn't been sufficiently tightened up. What I'd like to do is ensure that when we talk about infeasibility, we're talking about physical, topological, and we're not talking about economic feasibility,
Yeah.
which is what the applicants would all too likely argue.
Yeah.
So I think it's more a definition, adding something in the definitions or making it more explicit in the exception, but to link those two things.
Doesn't have to do as much improvement.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Scott, let me ask, okay, I put this wording in exceptions. Should it have been up
It
in,
was an economically
LU 18 in the, like, item number 3? I mean, I don't want to get placed in, I want it to get placed in appropriate.
Say that again.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was focusing on exceptions for all of my wording here on
the exceptions
on
section.
5.9, 5-9.
Okay.
Should I have been focusing and should I have put it up on page 5.8 in area 3, in item number 3? So,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
so I don't know if the wording is located in the appropriate spot there.
Probably, yeah.
Didn't you talk about D?
Yeah, so it's not
Right.
linked under exceptions, but it's part of the deal.
It is the rule, not the exception.
It's a rule, not the exception.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
I would say, as strongly as it sounds like the planning commission feels about this, it probably should be on 5-8, because then you're really driving home. I mean, someone's going to look at 5.8 first
Right.
and say, okay, this is the standard, this is the requirement. We don't want them to, search for the exception, because then that's, yeah.
And if we could just get rid of all the exceptions, I would be happiest with that.
That might be a tough get.
Yeah, I know. That was a feeble attempt at humor at this point.
Yeah, so we can do that. Everybody in
Okay.
agreement that we might move it up to the front? Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
whichever it fits best at.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Okay. Let's see, I think we're back to, what page is that number? 39, like 3-40 and onward. Let's go down to the end of, to the beginning of 3C, so between there and 3-45. So does anybody have anything about the downtown waterfront areas?
Oh, is that where we are now?
Can we go back to 341
Sure.
for a minute? That's, so the master plan for Morro Rock, this is where I was confused as to, that's not the North Embarcadero, that's not the, whatever we decided to call, the south of Cloisters.
This is something different. This
is
would
some-
be for the area around the state park property. And that's why I think it says to work with state parks.
All right.
Um,
State Park has their own general plan that includes that area. It hasn't been updated in a while, so.
Okay.
Is that why we can't get the parking lot fixed there?
Yeah, I mean, that parking lot's on state park lands and they closed it. That's why it's like that.
Yeah.
It's their parking lot, not ours.
Did you just say that state park, that parking lot? Yeah.
The parking lot that's closed, at the end of this, where the rock is, once you go where the parking lot's closed off, you go up the road and
Oh,
and
yeah,
the gates
yeah,
across,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
state
yeah.
parks. The parking lot that goes beyond that is state parks. The other one, we oversee.
Can I just make a comment on that closure, just real quick? Like, that right there, when they close it off, I think that the people that are affected by that the most are the most disadvantaged to enjoy that area. For them to be able to drive up and turn around and see something there. Because if you're just running around or on a bike and stuff, there's no problem. But a lot of times I notice that people that are like disabled and stuff, it would be nice, I don't know if you could talk to them, but it'd be nice if that was open for the people that are older and just handicapped or disadvantaged.
I was talking about the terrible conditions of the parking lot that we oversee.
Ours, yeah. Right. We have limited ability, like we have to go in there every year after it rains and then go fill in all the potholes with gravel and stuff. We can't pave it because it requires a coastal development permit. It would be through the Coastal Commission, and I guess we've tried to do that in the past and had issues, and so that's the solution, is the sort of graveling and regrading and that type of thing. So,
I thought that was a speed
So,
bump.
so Scott, do you
drive slow.
do you think this intermodal sections in this is strong enough to allow for bike sharing or
I don't think we have anything in here that would prohibit us from doing any of those types of things.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, I don't know.
There's things down in the transportation that talk about bikes more specifically, but I think,
Yeah.
once we get there, there's
Yeah.
some
I mean, we
stuff
can
like that.
certainly, if you want to identify things like that, we can do that too.
Okay, so everybody good with that? We're ready to move on to 3C.
I think we're picking up where we have some of the PowerPoint presentation again.
Okay.
So real quick,
Progress.
just to introduce you to the community design element, we did already talk a little bit about the key figure, but we have an overview. We talk about how resiliency is addressed in this element. We talk about the vision for each of the community character areas, which we did start to introduce ourselves to a little bit, but that is the idea that to some extent you can identify areas as unique parts of Morro Bay, and or neighborhoods would be another word for the residential part, and what is defining about that area, and we have some photos there. And then the key issue that we identified in this element is neighborhood compatibility in residential areas. It's been an issue for a long time, as you guys know. And then we have goals and policies. And then we have the figure here, which we already talked about. So happy to take input on this element.
Okay, I have one item, and we need to develop commercial guidelines for each of the various areas. So I think that's been a stated goal of the city council, but I think it needs to be stated in here too.
Huh?
We call for citywide right now.
Yeah. So, what section would be? Is
Is that in?
it the implementation? I mean, of the
I think it
implementation.
is in the implementation. Just searching. Well, policy CD 1.3 is the way it's written right now, which would be a citywide. And then we have an implementation action. I believe it's a CD 5 or CD 6
Okay.
for that. But it sounds like you're saying you think there should be
We've got
guidelines specific to each of the areas.
Yeah, we've got 10 sections that we kind of divided the city off into areas, into character areas. That, so, The North Morro Bay area should have, has its own character. The Quintana area has its own character. The downtown and the Embarcadero has its own character. The South Main Street area kind of has its own character too. So I think we need to be able to identify the differences in those areas and do, whether we do a specific design guideline, commercial design guideline, and then do subsections. That's kind of how they did it in San Luis Obispo. In like Salinas, they did specific area plans and specific guidelines for different areas. So,
And we have a start to that in the downtown and waterfront strategic plan. We have general design guidelines that apply to the two areas, and then we have specific ones that are specific to each.
right.
And so I guess the question is, we have the policy that talks about developing them citywide. Do you want it more specific than that? Because that would do what you're asking. I mean, the intent is to go do those things. I think.
Right.
I mean, we talk about it all the time. I mean, I think that's where we'd be going with it. And certainly, if you want something more specific, we can do that. But we have an implementation piece that tells us to go do that in here in the implementation section.
So how does the rest of you feel like? Do you think we can handle it citywide with uses, or do you think we should do it specifically to develop the individual characters of the area?
I think I like the idea of having individual guidelines, if for no other reason, then we could improve some of the areas. The Quintana commercial area, well, if we just kind of replicate what's there, we
Fair
should.
point.
Yeah, we should. So I think we should state somewhere on paper what we'd like it to be.
I think what's interesting is we had such changes about things like the sign policy in these different areas, but then we don't talk about the buildings or,
Right.
I know Commissioner Lurie and I probably daily see the struggle of the high school students trying to go down North Main to the high school. And there's just some of these things about, it's almost like a specific area thing. And so we have some of those things out there, but to me it's the commercial. It says, and what I have written down here is, where do we really talk about the streetscapes in these individual places?
Right.
Because it's the thing that we chose to show for the downtown isn't so much the buildings, it's the streetscape. And that's where we've had some of the biggest controversies. And I think it's huge, and it ties into things like the circulation system. I feel horrible watching these kids trying to ride their bikes and things, and eventually we'll figure out what happens down at the mother of all roundabouts down there, I guess. But it's some of these things that there's a speed design thing that I think is really different about downtown versus Quintana from Route 1 versus North Morro Bay from Route 1. Those are really different things.
Yeah, and the streetscape is a vital component of commercial design guidelines.
And even the downtown and waterfront strategic plan spoke to that, and I think as did the economic development strategic plan for the other commercial areas in town as well. So the good thing is you have starting points. You have policies that you can look at. Hey, this is what we've gotten so far. So we need to push that into formalized guidelines for these areas. So that leads us back. We have the one here that talks about just having design guidelines for the entire. Gotta look at the specific policies with the language. What was it again?
It's policy CD 1.3,
What page is that?
and it's on page 3-56.
356.
And then implementation action CD-2.
So what's the implementation page?
It is on 5-12.
5-12.
I need more pens.
And it actually does call for focus on certain character areas. So I think it really is, maybe there could be some small tweaks if that's what you're looking for, but I think it may be getting at what you're looking for.
Part of what scares me is when you start splitting these things up in their different components, you don't see the holistic thing. I guess in some ways, this is probably what keeps Scott up late at night when I talk, is I'd like to see almost specific plans for all these different places, where you're looking at the buildings, the sidewalks, the transit, everything's all at once. instead of looking at them, splitting it up into, here's the commercial guidelines, here's the design guidelines, here's the, street or transit guidelines. I don't know what's easier in terms of the potential developer, owner, improver to look at in terms of those things. I know as a person who thinks about planning a lot, seeing a document that tells me the way that whole area is conceived is easier than looking at something piecemeal, because I'll just get a piecemeal solution if I see that. But if this is the way we start, I think that's fine. Maybe that's better for 5 years down the line. Or something.
I mean, I'm totally comfortable adding some specificity about what we would be doing, that we would have them specific to our commercial areas, and we already have residential, but probably we could be specific about, hey, right now we have really single-family residential design guidelines. We probably need to say that we're going to have multifamily residential design guidelines, and that we're going to have commercial. I think it's nice to have one thing saying we're going to develop them, overall for everything, and it might just be that that's what you have. You have the commercial and the single-family residential and multifamily, and that's the whole package, of them all. I mean, it kind of depends on where you want us to go. But we can be more specific in here and say that's what we're going to go do. I mean, we're going to have them for those different areas in town. Comfortable with that.
I think it might not be as burdensome as it sounds going into it, because, if you have the residential design guidelines and then the commercial, probably it's kind of tweaking it, say, for commercial North Main Street, and it's probably, tweaking the residential thing for North Embarcadero, that sort of thing. So you get a couple of major design documents, and then you say, okay, now what's different about this other area that we have to change?
Yeah, that's largely the tact we took with the DWSP. We did the same thing. We looked at the stuff in those areas and kind of came up with some overall overarching goals that would apply to both. And then we said, okay, and these are sort of themed things that we like that are waterfront. These are sort of themed things that we like in the downtown. And then you can really get into a more expanded discussion, I think, if we develop specific design guidelines to those areas, because we can start talking about architecture in those areas and things and give examples of things that we like and things that we maybe don't like as much, or things we want to change. So I think that you wanted to sort of tell the story about what you want to do later. So I think that works.
Yeah, I think your idea of having an overarching, bird's eye view, and then going into individual modules for specific areas. I think that could work. So
I don't know that either saying we're going to do it separately or having it doing it the way that it is or what have you really prohibits us from doing either one. I think it's general enough. There will be sort of a natural outcome of it once we start working on it. I mean, right now it's a little bit theoretical, right? We don't exactly know what it's going to look like, and we're just saying, hey, we want to go do these things. I think that's probably where we want to be. This is a general plan, so it's like, hey, let's get the concept down there, tell us to go do it so I can program it, because that's the program into our goals and objectives, get a little bit of money budgeted against it in case we need to get some outside help to give us some, exhibits and that type of thing to support with the policy language that we come up with.
do you think the wording we have in here now is sufficient to do that for us, or do we need to enhance it?
It probably, it seems to me, I don't know, this seems to allow me to do any of those things. Like I would not have in reading through here, I don't have a problem saying, okay, when we got done with this, we came up with 3 separate documents. Or when we got done with this, we came up with one document that has 3 separate sections in it. It's the same to me. I think I have that authority given the policy direction.
Okay, I'm happy with that then.
Okay.
One of the things that, if I'm hearing correctly, what you're, like the specific plan of going back to these different areas, and one of the things, just right off the bat, where it says Morro Bay is a small town coastal community with eclectic style and welcoming atmosphere. To me, what small town means is that we have a diversity here, and it shows in our different areas. We have a lot of economic diversity in this town, okay? And so you go to like North Morro Bay, where the lots are smaller and this and that, it lends itself to a certain thing. So that's why I like that specific plan. You go to the Heights and stuff where the lots are bigger and stuff. So one of the things is I would like to see that kind of mention of what, as a description of our community, more than just eclectic. Eclectic is, artistic, or whatever, but I don't know what the language is really, right now, but I think that we should kind of mention that we have a lot of, like, people that live in the trailer park, for instance. They make that small town a small town but they're a disadvantaged class income. And yet, we have other areas that, more affluent. But that, I think, is a description of, it's almost an operational definition of what a small town is. It has that diversity.
I'm actually surprised I'm on this side of this, but I'm listening to everybody, and when I think of small town eclectic as stated, I think of like keep Portland funky kind of thing. And I don't know that that's what we want to do.
You're going to laugh, but that was one of the describers that we started off with was funky, and then they said maybe we don't want to call ourselves funky, and we removed funky and went to eclectic. So that was a theme that we got from the outreach that we did. We did workshops, we did stakeholder outreach, and that was a consistent theme through all of that. Wouldn't you both say?
Yeah.
And again, we had funky. We did, and then everybody like, maybe we don't want to call ourselves funky, and so we came up with another word for that, and that was eclectic.
Well, where I was going with that is, I mean, I come from a military engineering kind of background, and I don't want to see a military base, but I kind of dig that it's different, and like standards are. I mean, we want to not encourage neon green octopi, but maybe
Maybe, if it works.
if it works.
I'm not kidding.
I don't know where I was going with that. I kind of decided. I just kind of had to.
Okay, well,
Because that's for me.
yeah, I think that's what we all want, is we all want it to be, eclectic, we want it to be, we want to be able to live in a community that's got vitality, but yet, isn't deteriorating, so.
And that was what was expressed from the community. I mean, you're stating what the community told us they wanted it. They said, hey, we like the funky, eclectic nature of what we have here.
Mm-hmm.
We might like to have it stepped up a notch.
Yeah.
We don't want to go down. We want to go up a notch. And that's, I think, what we heard. And so a lot of the policy sort of based on that. It's like, how do we get to the next level? It's why we did the EWSP and EDSP. Those are largely economic development tools, but it's kind of why we did those things, was to
Funkify.
Yeah. Okay, let's kind
And to
of
give
move on to
to
three.
you guys more tools
Sorry.
for when you're making these design decisions, so that you have more of a roadmap. I mean, obviously, we've talked about that a lot with the residential as well.
Yeah, the residential design guidelines, I think, have been a success.
we've
So,
been able to use them a lot. And now the development community knows we have them, and they expect to use them. I mean, it takes a while for that to get pushed out, but we have some folks that are reluctant to comply or don't like hearing about it, but they're slowly coming around and understanding that if they can't, if they're unwilling to do it for staff levels, when they get to the planning commission, there's an expectation that's going to be put upon them. So it's good. I mean, again, it takes a little while. It doesn't happen overnight, but
And it's very helpful, too, just that initial contact with people at the counter. There's a vacant lot. Can I talk to staff about what I can do here? And it's excellent. It's a great tool to say, in addition to your development setbacks, this is kind of what the look that we expect to see. Here's the design guidelines. It's full of images, so it really kind of gives people a visual. They're not drowning in words, so it's really been a win for the city and for staff.
and it gives them a baseline for the quality of the design that we're looking for.
Exactly.
This is another picky point. I like the images. I think Commissioner Lohr's house and my house may be in the North Morro Bay picture there. I was trying to take a look at it. But I would not. I was actually kind of poking fun at this building. I don't think this building's a good building to use as an example for anything. I would take the picture of the Morro Bay Community Center and trade it out for something else. And I'd also trade out the picture at the bottom of 354, because I'm not sure we would approve that project now. And I don't mind the funky aspect, and I know we've got some legacy things, but I think if we've got a planning document, we want to make sure we have images of exemplary
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I agree.
Me too.
I agree.
You know, kind of bouncing off what Michael was
thought
just
about
saying
that.
about the commercial and the community center. One of the things that I see for the commercial, we should be integrating job, like manufacturing, there's, not like big manufacturing, but some kind of incentive or so, where you have manufacturing areas where you can have more like commercial
We have those through zoning, I mean,
through zoning.
yeah,
That's how we would
that's how it's
handle that.
accomplished, yeah. I mean, we have areas that are zoned for those types of uses, and then we
Yeah.
allow for it. I mean, is that not where you were going? I mean,
Yeah,
maybe I
that's kind of
misunderstood.
what,
But maybe get a photo from that end of the highway lane commercial.
Yeah,
Okay.
kind of going that way where we could say, hey, look, there's a manufacturing facility.
Okay, let's move on to key issues, like 356, if you guys are okay with that. And we're getting into the goals and policies. God, please, on CD 1.7, do not allow the Public Works Department to design our signage. Have it come before the Planning Commission, because every time they do it, every time the signage has come before us, we've approved it, and then Public Works goes out, purchases the sign, and they're never what we approved. So we had that happen. Michael, do you remember that? I think you were on that. There was supposed to be painted 3D profiled directional signs, and they came back as, flat cardboard and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I was just looking at 1.5. I know we have the design guidelines, but, that idea of what complementary means is, to me, it rings as being very conservative, and I think some of the best projects we've seen the last few years are ones that are made out of corrugated metal. So I don't want to, I think since we've got the design guidelines, they take detail precedent over something general here, so that just may be a wordsmithing thing that bothers me more than it should, but.
I kind of take that to mean like drought resistant and climate appropriate and things like that. But that may be just my take.
I think it could be both of those things.
yeah. I see where you're going with it, Mike, but I'm not.
Yeah, it's
appalled by it.
fine.
And the good part is when we do develop the design guidelines, I mean, you already have residential ones that tell the story there, and we explicitly put language in there, and you'll probably put them in the other areas when we have developed design guidelines that they're not 100% prescriptive. You can come up with unique ideas. I mean, we spent a lot of time going back and forth on making sure that language was in there so people understood they could come up with unique ideas, and those would be okay too. Could be okay too, depending on review. So.
Yeah, because I like the 1.8. I think that seems to me to be very progressive language that's open-ended about.
Yeah, we shouldn't stifle innovation, and once again, I think that just looking at the design elements, as we approach any development that approaches any ESHA, I think we should be really considering innovation, and if you can't mandate it, you could at least favor it.
Okay, we good on that, so we're now at 3D, economic development. Is everybody okay, Joe?
Before we go too further, I think I've
Okay.
waited too long. It was,
We can go backwards.
The implementation, page 5-6.
Okay, Joe, we can't go that far back.
I knew somebody was going to say that.
The very last thing on the page, the reference to the 4,000 square feet in size, the exception to the waiting period. There's an exception for 4,000 square foot homes.
Where you
The
at?
very,
John?
LU-13.
Okay.
So, and I'm reading that the implementation of the waiting period, but exempting, and exempting 4,000 square foot. And I didn't understand why we were exempting 4,000 square foot homes.
We got that comment during GPAC, and we're looking into that. We don't know.
I'd like to.
Either,
I'd
and-
recommend that we delete that.
Well, so as I understand that, that would be like a gigantic residence in or in a mixed-use downtown? Am I reading
Well,
that right?
I think it's individual units over 4,000 square feet. So it struck me, I thought it meant to be somebody builds a large house and therefore they're entitled to an exemption from the.
I think that when we spoke about it before, we decided that we didn't think it made a lot of sense. So it likely would go away, but we haven't made a final decision.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with it going away.
Yeah, I don't understand it, so I guess.
Yeah.
Implementing waiting period.
So we had, I mean, that piece of it, and again, it's probably more appropriate to deal with it through the ordinance itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this probably could be lost. It does, some portion of that reflects even some comments that we had when we had the workshop here, but not workshop, but information session. But I think it's probably a good idea to axe that.
And we're going to be we're going to be seeing that again and battling through that whole vacation rental section again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I'd go back real quick to
Yeah.
2.1, 2.2, 2.3. We're not prohibiting in any way we're not restricting yard locations for anything. If somebody wants to grow food in their front yard, that's cool. Animal keeping, this is back where we were 358, 3-58, it's the food, local food production. I've just seen places where people have complained about gardening in the front yard.
Well,
Well, that's in the zoning code, and I think that section, have they seen that section yet? It's pretty detailed, I think.
It's either in the use section or it could be in the, it's the overall, I think it might be in module 4, they haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's in module 4 and you haven't seen it, but it allows for, yes, you can have those types
Grow
of
anything.
gardens in your yard, in the front, back, rear, it doesn't limit them.
All right.
okay,
But
so,
you'll get to see it, I think that's in there, right?
so moving on to 3D, that's 359, 3-59.
We have an introduction for that.
Yeah, so we do have the same couple of introductory sections. So we have some demographics. This is excerpted from the community baseline assessment, so the background report. So a brief snapshot of what's more lengthy in that report, and then the key issues for this element were affordable housing, market surplus and leakage, stagnated population and jobs growth, and providing for the needs of both residents and visitors. And then we have goals and policies, like in all of the other elements. So
Okay.
I think we're
Do we
letting
wanna
a few
take a-
people get some coffee.
Yeah, let's take like 3 minutes.
Sounds good.
I started to rush, sorry.
We ready? Okay. Okay, welcome back. And we're on 3D. Okay. Did we finish our introduction?
We did.
Okay. Okay, so this is economic development and relationship to other elements, resiliency and demographics. I just want to note that we have an interesting age demographic for the city. Okay, does any,
I don't have so many any questions or as just observations. I think this is a fascinating section to read
Yeah.
because some of our citizens were talking about the nature of the residential population versus the visitor population. And this is where it's starting to show that we have a certain commercial makeup based on that kind of, I'll say, skew that we have now. We want to maintain the visitors, but I think it's because of the lack of residents that we have some of the issues that get brought up here, that we're trying to make sure we don't close down the growth of valuable jobs here in innovative thinking. That I think this is a really fascinating section to read through.
you know, I see the potential, the largest change of potential for Morro Bay is the shift of demographic from being a second home community to being a bedroom community for tech development in San Luis Obispo. So,
Here, hopefully here.
yeah, so what I see is, you know, we brought it up in some other places, is if we just fill out our existing housing stock with full-time residents, we're going to be over our Measure F limit, you know, immediately. And when these residences are worth more as full-time housing for workforce housing for high-tech community than they are as second homes, we're going to see a really rapid demographic change. And so hopefully we can pick that up and adjust to it if it happens.
I mean, like I said earlier, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think the idea is, I hope it's not, I've spent all this time doing this. I think the idea is that, you know, we have a more progressive document now. We're supposed to be paying attention to those things, looking at them over time. You're supposed to be, you know, checking in on those types of things because things do tend to change faster as we move forward into the future, right? I mean, and so I think this is important. I don't think we're going to be letting the document sit here for 30 years before we ever pick it up and do anything with it. It seems unlikely to me.
And you probably had experienced this in your previous location in Pismo, where there was that demographic change too. If you try driving from San Luis, you know, at 5 o'clock heading south or 4:30 heading south, those aren't second homeowners. Like they, you know.
Well, some of them are going to the 5 cities. Most of them are going to the city of Santa Maria.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's true.
they have all the housing units. Population over 100,000, building housing all over town. So, yeah, that's where most of those folks, I live there, so
Yeah.
I'm driving with them to go home.
With respect to economic development and affordable housing, a key issue, and I look at this one thing that he said is that half of the people are paying 30% of their income housing costs. You know, really, when you look at some of the people that are renting, that's way more than 30%, way more. And one of the things that if we are going to be keeping our small town atmosphere and keeping that a viable and a reality into the future, I think that it's twofold. We need to have. I had this dream, okay, that one of the things, when I look at this, I look at it as a whole integration. One of the things is to help keep the diversity, the income diversity in our community. One of the things we could do as a city, we we need to invest in the carbon cap and trade market, I think, where we take greenhouse gases and actually start dealing with it, okay? And have it so we have a fund that we can maybe like a scholarship fund where we can subsidize a future generation child or something going to college, for instance, from that investment. And when I look at these kind of elements like affordable housing, bringing it down, making it affordable would be shrinking down the size of the home or a townhome or an apartment or whatever. But to make it work, we need to have like incentives so we can make that happen and have it. And I don't know how to go about the language, but have it so the loopholes are, like it's not filled. It's like I'm not. Like somebody would just be investing. There's a difference between somebody investing and a difference between somebody like, okay, you want a tech business? Well, we don't have any tech business here. But you got millennials, for instance, they come in, give them a chance to buy. If it's a tiny home, if it's a small little thing, you give it an opportunity where we have that availability. Okay, that's keeping that economic diversity is going to be a real challenge, especially on the coast. But that is part of this economic or this environmental justice program that all these agencies are now implementing and moving forward with, because they recognize in climate adaptation, because we're a coastal community, we need to be very conscious of our disadvantaged, we're marginally disadvantaged community, as some agencies stated. So I just looking at it as on the big picture, just keeping that in mind when we start looking at economic development. Okay.
Largely, the economic development focus of this document and the others that I mentioned before, the EDSP and the DWSP. They have goals that we're supposed to go out there and achieve, and they have us working with our current commercial community to improve the situation for them, train them, provide training opportunities for them to put together business plans. A lot of them don't have business plans.
Right.
Can you? It's hard for me to imagine that, but they don't. Usually most people that have a business have a 5-year plan and update that every year. A lot of folks don't. So Chamber's helping with that. We're partnering with the Chamber to do that. And we're doing outreach to all of the 4 commercial areas in town. We're meeting with all of them. We've had, I think the next one's due is going to be downtown. We do business walks, and then we have a meeting, and then we follow it up with implementation things that are specific to those areas. And then the Chamber's working with some of the other economic development entities that are in the county to provide extra training for those folks if they want it, or to bring in folks to provide that here in town for them, and to really identify what they want. And then we have short-term, kind of midterm and long-term implementation items that are identified in those documents, and we're working through that right now as we speak. We're doing that. Once we're done, I think I mentioned this earlier sort of offline, is once we're sort of done with this process, I'm going to switch the amount of time that I'm spending on this, and it's going to go into implementation for those types of things. It's going to be focused on economic development. The other component of that, and you've heard me say this many times before when we've been looking at this documents, is part of the issues that we have with housing is, we have to make it clear that we're going to allow mixed use, and we put it out there in front, mixed use. We're going to be able to provide housing units. We need people to come in and do it, but we're clearing the way. And then we looked at, issues like you had those, the projects that came forward on North Morro Bay, right? The apartment building. Mm-hmm. Well, we have development standards that don't let you get to the density. That's a problem. Mm-hmm. Planning Commission, you had to work through that. That was difficult. You shouldn't have to do that. Our development standards should reflect what the densities that's allowed, and we should be able to build that, and it shouldn't be, you shouldn't have to go through the process that you went through. Mm-hmm. And so we're removing barriers. And so you've heard me say it before, but that's the intent behind all of the work that we're doing to this point, is removing the barriers that we have in our existing codes, facilitating those projects to come forward with the expectation that we're going to be building those units, and to get that, and that encourages the investment in the community. It helps both out in economic development, and it'll help us build housing.
Yeah.
So.
But, Scott, you brought up a good point, though. What we have to do, though, when we, and I've mentioned this before in other meetings, is that we need to have the supportive infrastructure first. So if somebody wants to come in and get a track and build, we can't rely just passing it on down to the ratepayer and kicking that can down the road. We need to have it clear that say, hey, we need infrastructure repair here. People talk about, that treatment plant's 60 years old. I go, how old do you think the collection system is? You know what I mean? I've seen maps in 53, you know what I mean? So we need to keep that in the loop, and having, and I know it's public works, and I know, but I mean, it's
part of the planning processes we're going through now.
Yeah.
One water planning is about that. Mm-hmm. And it's evaluating the infrastructure that you have and putting that online. It's all, thankfully the city's doing it all right now, mm-hmm. right? Because it is us doing it. And identifying those things, and then over time you have to budget for those things. And part of that is also tied to economic development. We have to be bringing in more money, so we have, because largely it's put upon us to fund those things.
Our big revenue income used to be the power plant and fishing.
Yeah.
And so, the revenue incomes now either has to ship to TOT taxes or sales tax, So that's part of the thing about the vacation rentals. If we don't have more vacation rentals, we have less TOT tax, we have less revenue for infrastructure. So that's part of what gets lost, and gets lost in we want to keep it. We don't want anything to change, but
yeah, but
things do change.
There's other revenue streams that are into the future. These revenue streams are, again, I'm bringing up climate change, greenhouse gas sequestration. There's a huge amount of monies being invested in grants and stuff to deal with those issues, and opportunities that we should look at a whole new way of a revenue stream. Because in California, if we were someplace else in Texas, maybe not. But here, California has taken the lead on those issues, and I think that it's
Richard,
important.
there's a business model for you then.
Well, and probably something we'll be looking at as we update the cap. I think we're due to start that also next year. So, yeah.
Dealing with what?
The cap. We have to update the cap. Climate action plan.
Oh, yeah.
And that's going to start. That effort's going to start next year too, along with our.
Yeah. While you're resting, right?
So fair point. Just that's we're going to be doing that effort, and that's where we can identify some of those things, and maybe hopefully there's some some things become more clear about what opportunities are out there, to go after funds to do the implementation. So I would say that's not something that we're not looking at. It's something that we'll be looking at through a specific planning effort that's literally in the immediate future, our immediate future, I should say.
Okay, are we good with 3D then, guys?
Oh, no. I got a question. On 1.4, on 3 dash, is it 54? 64. The technology resources make needed and desirable renewable energy and modern technology resources readily available to businesses. So one question I have is, we're not advocating people generate their own power there. Is that sort of the community choice aggregation piece?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, which I'm totally for, and I'm assuming that may potentially be attached to the windmills if they come in, or somewhere.
It might be. It's part of the, if that comes through, it seems they've been working to that end, and we've been meeting with them regularly. So that could be part of that, or part of the agreement, the community benefits agreement that the city enters into with them. That'll probably be something that's coming up here in the not too distant future as well.
Okay. I had a bunch of things here. 3.2, something about adding a term for landscape. It talks about building designs, features, practices, but I think we should add landscape in there as well. Equitable economy. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I can't read my writing. 3.6 chain stores, I guess I was wondering how serious we mean that, because are things like Sonic seen as a chain? And, you know, we're seeing some of those things go up Main Street. You know, we've got a couple larger lots up, you know, Spencer's has a couple pad spots, I imagine. So are we saying any chain commercial enterprise, or are we saying just chain store as in?
Just national chain stores.
Ian, I think the point was put those in the area where we have them, which is on Quintana, as opposed to putting the chain stores in the middle of the downtown.
So the fast food places aren't chain stores?
No, they are. We're saying yes, put them
Okay.
there,
Okay.
because we have other ones there. They're appropriately located there. That's what this says. And that's part of the the conversation that came out of community outreach, came out of GPAC.
And I think this might have been discussed at a previous joint PC council meeting.
I thought so as well.
The Planning Commission and Council had some in early 2017 on this.
Well, I'm fine to
Yeah.
limit them.
Yeah.
It just seemed like we've let people come in off of Quintana if somebody came in
And Sonic.
and wanted that pad at Spencer's. I mean, there's a fairly large commercial section right next to that.
Oh, in the Spencer's area?
Where the farmer's market shows up. I mean, that looks like there's at least one other pad location there.
Yeah, there's a large area that's adjacent to this vacant. Sure.
Yeah.
So that's what it's suggesting. Like, we don't want the chain stores in those locations.
Okay.
But we have them in this location. They're not going away. So if you're going to locate them where the other ones are, and then preserve our waterfront in our downtown and in North Main, to areas that don't have those types of facilities.
So Scott, this may not fit here, but how are we justifying these drive-throughs with our greenhouse gas emissions
That was another one
standards?
that's farther down the post-its.
It seems like
Post-it
it's
back here.
counterintuitive unless we require the only people that drive through are in EVs, electric vehicles.
I have a hybrid and it shuts off whenever whenever I'm idling, it's auto
Right.
shut off.
So what policy is this?
I didn't see the policy in here, but it would be environmental justice or whatever. But I'm wondering if, like San Luis doesn't allow drive-throughs at all.
Some
So-
cities don't.
It would seem to me like we especially want to think about things like that in the downtown. I
Right.
mean, I know some of the banks or financial things have drive-throughs, but that's still a car idling in a place that we're trying to get more people to walk. You know, if it's, I don't think it's as big a deal if it's along Route 1, but it's different if it's in the downtown.
Yeah, and it's an extra ingress and egress, on sidewalk cuts. It's also pretty large investment in parking and paving area also. So,
Besides the B of A, which is going away, I can't think of another one in the downtown.
well, the Burger King.
Well, on Quintana.
Oh, that's on Quintana.
Yeah, I mean, we have drive-throughs. We have existing
Right.
ones.
Right.
I mean, if you don't want them in some of these other areas, we can simply say that. I mean,
Well, I brought it up, I wanted to kind of bring it up for discussion to see where we wanted to go with that.
again, so what do you all think?
Well, I think, again, it goes with the climate action plan. It also gets into the kind of what's the image we want to talk about for the downtown, and I don't think a bunch of cars queued up is the image
Right.
that people are anticipating. We want people to get out of their car wherever we figured out for them to park and walk.
I mean, not to put too fine a point on our visitor base, but, largely in the valley, I think you'll find that they probably would not want to have to get off their cars to go inside and order and then get off or get back in their car. I'm just saying a largely valley-based tourist population would probably be against that. Not that I think that would be the driving factor, but I'm just kind of bringing that up.
But should we promote that?
So citywide, so we have 4 commercial areas identified, so I don't think we really want drive-throughs down on the Embarcadero.
No.
Right? So you could also
Right.
say we don't want them in the downtown.
Downtown.
You don't want them in the downtown.
I agree.
And we have them on Quintana. I mean, if you don't want them, we could not allow more. There's not a whole lot of capacity there to put more, but there's a couple paths that could be developed. So you could see a fast food something wanting to go to one of those. The one out there's a pad in front of Albertsons out there. It's small, but I mean you could put something there that is a drive-through. If you don't want that there, now's the time to say that. I would think drive-throughs probably largely aren't something you'd really want on North Main.
No.
Either.
No.
So I mean, if I can get getting head nods from most of you about that. Hey, the drive-through. At least those three areas don't seem appropriate.
I think if we restrict them to the Quintana, Quintana area, then we're not disallowing them, but we're also,
Well, I would say the Quintana or the immediately adjacent to the off-ramps. I mean, where the Taco Bell's at and where the Sonic's proposed.
well, see, I still have a real big problem with the Sonic, and I always did because the interaction with the high school and the high school kids, and then the drive-through and stuff. I never was comfortable with that project at all, and so I don't think it's appropriate there to begin with. So I would rather not see any more go in. If we can leave them up in the Quintana area, then if somebody wants to do it, they could take the dollar store and reconvert that. There's other areas in the Cookie Crock
space there, too.
division and stuff.
This is the time frame where you want to kind of come up with those ideas. I mean, that's a shift away because we don't have the prohibition right now. But it seems, like I said, when you think about those areas, I mean, at least the three, it seems to me I don't really want drive-throughs in those areas either.
I would say for
there
sure
are
we don't
strong
want.
feelings about like you were saying about the areas where the Taco Bell and stuff are, but as you move north, I wouldn't want them there. So I mean, if you're going to call that corridor out, that seems to somewhat reasonable not to have them there. So I mean, you're all mostly nodding your head at me. So I think we can go with hey, we'll put policy in there and push it through zoning as well.
Yeah, and I remember when Sonic came before us, I mean, there was a fair amount of discussion about,
Quintana's okay.
it sort of skewed the whole thing, but they were sort of gateways to Morro Bay. And so the roundabout area and the 41 intersection are what people see as they come into Morro Bay. And I think most would like not to have fast food drive-ins there.
Right.
As the gateway to the city.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
The last thing I have is a small editorial thing on policy 4.3. In partnership with Cal Poly, you should also say Cuesta because they've got the likelihood of workforce programs.
They've restarted one of their programs over there that I know the Chamber's tapped into. That's actually a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
So,
Before you go any further, Commissioner Lucas, you mentioned editing policy ED 3.2, but you mentioned it and there wasn't any discussion. So
yeah.
you said add a term for landscaping.
That describe environmentally conscious building designs, landscapes, features, something like that.
Is
We talk
there a
about.
consensus then?
Yeah, it should be included.
I deal with Cal Green every day, and as stringent as that is, I think that's plenty, but whatever the board is in favor of.
okay, so I have two of you saying okay, and one of them like, okay, all right. So we have at least
Well,
three.
Cal Green in and of itself is relatively restrictive, so I don't feel the need to be more so.
Just starting to get good. Makes people work a lot. The architects work a lot harder, which they should.
Break to the engineers, right?
So are we done with this section, or
Anybody else have anything in 3D? Michael, you? Okay, let's move on to circulation. That's 3E. Do we have you got something?
Yeah, just real quick. Where it says healthcare employment, encourage and provide jobs in the medical healthcare industry. Are we considering medical use marijuana in the healthcare industry for when we're talking about this? Like people that, let's say we can, people that want to like grow for they're particularly targeting for medical use.
I think this is just a recognized deficiency in our community that we don't have enough healthcare facilities in town, and so it encourages that. I think the medical marijuana thing is
A separate issue?
a separate issue, and we have an ordinance. It allows 2 of them. I mean, I'm literally working on it right now. I'm going through the vetting process for the app, starting to go through the vetting process for the 4 applications we have to date. I think we're going to get another one next week, so or later this week.
Because the reason why I bring up healthcare and employment, because they could hire local people to grow for a local distributor.
Yeah, the way our ordinance is written, that would be that's prohibited currently. Things may change over time.
I would say that the medical cannabis shouldn't be in the healthcare employment. I mean, that's not where we're going with that, I don't think.
I think this policy was really just referring to the lack of healthcare industry in town. And it's a concern that was voiced by a lot of the outreach that we did for the plan, and so we have a policy in here. I mean, right?
It was kind of looking at the opportunity for that, deficiency to be partnered with a job opportunity.
Yeah, that's kind of like, that's it.
Okay, so let's move on to circulation.
So circulation element, we have an overview about the element and the approach to resiliency. And then we get into the transportation network. So I want to call out a couple of the figures. We have figure CIR 1A. So that's we split the transportation network diagram into 2 figures because there were too many things on one figure. So we have the first figure showing the transit. So transit meaning everything but auto, and then bicycle facilities, and that's on page 3-72. And then we have the transportation network diagram for auto facilities, that's CIR 1B on the next page. And that one also has, I didn't put them on the slide. So I believe that's the one that also has some call-outs related to some of the improvements that are called for in this element related to the build-out of the plan. And then we have a section on other transportation components, and that includes goods movement, plan circulation improvements, transportation metrics, and parking. And then we have goals and policies that address all of those. So this is another beefy section, beefy element, so happy to get into discussing those figures further or any other comments that you have.
Okay.
I have a question. So I've heard scuttlebutt about the Embarcadero becoming a pedestrian area between Pacific and Harbor. How serious is that being discussed, and what would it take to? Well, how serious is that being discussed, I suppose?
So we went through a planning exercise for the Centennial Plaza area, which that Centennial Stair is. It included a component for looking at the streetscape as far as parking and circulation, and does it go one way, is it 2-way, what does that look like? And ultimately, when the plan was adopted, it maintained the 2-way concept with an idea that we might be willing at some point in the future to give it a test to go one way. And that would involve like temporary improvements to suggest it goes one way. I suppose that could be temporary improvements to close it down to see what it's like, because you can put up bollards and paint lines on the ground and that type of thing. So it could the city could do any number of things to make that happen. We've had a lot of conversations about it. There was a lot of interest through the workshops and so forth for that effort, the Downtown and Waterfront Strategic Plan as well, that talked about that. A lot of folks had interest in shutting it down entirely and making pedestrian plazas, making it one way, in improving sidewalk widths and pedestrian experiences, and allocating more of the road for bikes and pedestrians and that type of thing. So a lot of the conversation that's gone on with some of our ongoing planning efforts, but the only affirmative action that was taken was to not, at the time that plan was adopted by the council, include that. Not to say that it's something, it comes up regularly, you guys all hear it, I'm sure, and so it is something that in the future we could do.
Would it be appropriate to place it in this document?
It could be back in here. It could be placed in here, I'm sorry. I think the comfort level that we've experienced to this point is that we'd be willing to date it but not marry it. Meaning to test it out, but we don't want to like implement it and like make it all that way and get rid of all the road sections. You'd be, again, probably putting up, if you closed it off for pedestrians only, you'd probably putting up bollards at each edge that are temporary, the ones that kind of stick on the ground, and then doing some sort of treatment there that's non-permanent in the street, to allow pedestrians to take over that area, and maybe you're creating places for people to sit and putting in planters and things like that are temporary, that can be moved elsewhere, and do something along those lines, or you're taking it down to a single lane in one direction and then looking about how you deal with pedestrians and that type of thing, and then same thing, temporary improvements to enhance that experience.
And essentially, we did that with the downtown area too, with looking at, doing a coupling.
I think that was my first meeting.
Yeah, so the circulation down there works. I mean, we went through it, that exercise, and went through that exercise with Public Works as well, and it seemed like there's opportunities for circulation. So that's not really the big issue. Big issue is just comfort level. Everybody hates change.
Yeah.
And so hence hey, we would only like check it out maybe, but to not go beyond that. So
Middle ground option.
yeah, so that was kind of what it is. I mean, that could be captured in here. It could be characterized in here. It could be a thing that if we did it, there'd be a conversation paragraph about it or what have you, and then you'd have an implementation section that would read, I assume that we would go pursue that potentially, and then see what council says about it.
I would like to see something to
I would like to see more would at least talk about it again, so it's on the front of mind, because I think we.
Do you like the investigate language? Investigate language is nice because
Yes.
it gives us options.
Yes.
And we could investigate
One way.
pedestrian plaza or one way, and we could put both of them in there so we can look at both of what that would look like and
Yeah.
have that conversation. Do you want that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the ability to turn it on and off is just amazing. I mean, what blew me away coming out here the first time was when the farmers market down in Slow shut down the 5 biggest parts of the downtown. It's like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
That was amazing. So if we had some way to turn it on and off,
Yeah.
that it accommodated all the movement we had, but made it so cool to be down there walking.
Yeah.
I think that would be amazing.
Yeah, that's a great idea, just to be able to do, maybe do it on Friday, Friday through Monday or something. Friday through Sunday or something like
Holidays.
that. Or holidays or something like that, so we can.
avocado margarita festival. Things
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. And that would get people used to the idea, or at least see it. Yeah. Okay, so I think we got agreement on that. And then I didn't see in the circulation element, or maybe it's be too granular, but I didn't see any location for bike sharing, park and ride lots, or EV charging. So,
Actually mapped locations or?
actually potential locations,
Yeah,
or even,
we don't have those things identified
Or
on
even-
figures.
the
Goals.
goals.
I think we have charging stations in there.
Yeah, I thought so too.
Yeah.
I think we do.
The bike thing struck me. I was trying to see. It seemed like there was terminology somewhere about there should be bike accommodations at terminations, and I thought that language seemed odd, because it seems to me like we should ask the people who are doing the buildings to accommodate the bikes,
Right.
not necessarily a public space in the streetscape to accommodate the bikes.
The Green Code actually speaks to that on new commercial and significant commercial renovations, that there should be bike parking, bike storage, long-term bike storage, things like
Yeah,
that.
I think we're behind the curve on at least the obvious language that I remember seeing in here.
And the other thing that's happening in big cities are scooters.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, down in the Gaslamp district, there, a buddy that works down there, he's like, it showed up and then just proliferated everywhere, so they're having issues with it blocking sidewalks. So you just go to where you're going, it shuts it off, and then somebody else can come up and take it, but they just leave it right where it's at, and it's in the way or whatever.
Yeah.
So the accommodation part is an important one, I think.
The accommodation, yeah.
You need to have both.
One of the, regarding bicycles, there's an area that I think is just just plain dangerous, and that's North Morro Bay. I remember when we took that planning academy. I remember us, and there was they had these ideas from like the Netherlands or something.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things that was really cool was putting the cars, like for instance, imagine Main Street going northbound, putting the car on the edge of the traffic and then the bike in between the sidewalk and, you know, because there's enough room there. You know what I mean? They had the,
Separately.
you know, separated that way by a thing. That would be safer. And then get rid of that southbound. That's just plain dangerous. Southbound bike lane there along the fence where the dips are. I mean, you know, you can get into a little wobble there. So, I mean, it's just plain dangerous. So I think that is actually a hazard. And really, if there's two cars coming by your 3-foot limit, you don't have 3 feet with that. So I think that's actually a hazard.
The thing I was looking at was that policy 2.2. It says, provide facilities and amenities for active transportation users at public facilities, including bicycle storage and seating areas. And that limits it to public facilities. It would be all retail or all commercial or something that we start talking about that. Otherwise, we're not going to get people to use the bikes at all.
Where are you at?
It's 390.
390?
Yeah, 2.2. So I think, I don't know if you want to say encourage transportation at public facilities and commercial.
And we have the 2.4, which talks about by facility.
Oh, there it says shopping centers. But it says major, you know,
So just any?
I think we ought to look at how we take care of it, because it's, I know at school at Poly over the last 5 years it's just gotten monumental, the bicycle use, and it's dwarfing the capacity that they anticipated. And if we don't get ahead of that curve.
I think another thing that we should realize is there's as electric bikes get more affordable and stuff, and especially these pedal assist, you know, these are again become a little more safety issues because you can zip along pretty quick with those things. So I think it even more emphasizes the need for safe bike travel.
So on the policy 2.2, I think, you know, that's talking about the city improving its public facilities. If you put private facilities in there, what is that saying? Are we saying we want these types of facilities? I mean, like, we don't have a mechanism to encourage existing facilities to put these in. So what are we really just talking about for new development?
For redevelopment and new,
So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. I mean, are we saying that? Is that what we're trying to
Yeah.
say? Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually helpful. Thank
I
you.
think it's got to be a checklist that for anything new that comes in.
Yeah, you know, Scott, like right there, what you just said, that little area that in front of Del Mar. Let's say you did a bunch of little areas there where you don't have no cars. That would be like a perfect spot, and it would be maybe centrally located. It doesn't have to happen in every development or every tract, but you can have, little model communities, futuristic looking.
and I think it would be good to encourage the state parks to have, as a nexus or as a hub for bike sharing.
We had it in here because we've been talking about it forever. I mean, through the entire process, we talked about that.
Sorry. So I was just noticing, I don't see a policy in here on EV charging, so perhaps the commission would like to discuss if you'd like to incorporate something or modify one of the existing policies.
I'm curious why, like, Tesla hasn't done what they've done in Tascadero here. I mean, it seems like the market or the industry should be driving that development rather than public.
So, man, it's a fair point, and we have had conversations with some of the folks that implement these things, because you can lease space to me. Actually, the city can generate money from it because you generate lease revenue. They'll just come in and put them in. You just need to have infrastructure that's available to the parking space, right? Meaning electrical connection. I apologize. I've been meaning to talk to the Public Works Department. Maybe I'll do that on Tuesday next week when we have our DRT meeting, but to see where some of those conversations are, gone. I know that they're sort of limited from a staff standpoint right now, but they're just getting ready to hire a new person right now, so that might help. But I don't know. I know we had some folks approach us, and I directed them toward Public Works, but I don't know what happened with that. So, so that's out there. Those people have come in. They contacted me initially, and I was like, well, you want to put them in our parking lot? Public Works got to help you out. So I don't know where that went. So
Does that B of A property, is that entirely privately owned?
correct.
So that parking lot, okay.
But we've got a location on the Embarcadero at the maintenance shack. So basically across from Dutchman in that parking lot, Pacific. There's three-phase power at the maintenance shack there. And then also in the Triangle lot on Front Street there, basically across from GAFCO, at the pump station there, there's three-phase power there. So you've got two locations where you can easily do level 3 charging, and all you have to do is just throw a line over the pole, and you got three-phase power for level 3 charging in the most appropriate areas in Morro Bay to have them, where you want the people to come aggregate or stay overnight, and then that's an attraction for people, because I know that we won't go to a hotel that doesn't have level 2 charging. So that's what first thing we look at as an indicator is, okay, does this have a level 2 charging, or does this have level 3 charging, and how do we get there? So,
So to Cindy's point, do we want to put language in here to encourage that?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would note I knew we had something related to the bicycle parking in here. So circulation, so implementation, CIR 10. It says development standards for bicycle, pedestrian, and trail improvements, and amenities in new development and redeveloped projects, to include requirements for adequate, safe, and accessible bicycle parking, drinking fountains, public restrooms, benches, landscaping.
Okay.
So I think we're picked up. I think we're good on that.
We want to include electric scooters in that?
I don't.
It's interesting.
Analog.
My brother and his wife are visiting us this weekend, and they were full of conversations about scooters in the Los Angeles area and how much they are bothered by them right now, because it's that law of unintended consequences. They were intent on doing something good, and they didn't think about them being trash dumped on the sidewalk, aggregating, all that stuff.
Yeah, it's the exact same issue they're having down in the Gaslamp District in San Diego.
Getting back to the electric car spaces, do we want charging? Do we want to allow a trade out of any required space to be an electrical charge station if there's an entrepreneurial rationale for gaining income from that? So if store X is required to have 10 spaces, can they have 10 charging stations? Do we want to allow a one-to-one flipping if they can gain some income from that? And if so, would we want to limit how many go in? Because then you've got to have an electric car to park there.
So I mean that could be done through development standards. You could say, I'm going to give you an example. You could say up to 20% of the required parking spaces for any development could be could have electrical charging stations, or you could mandate them to have a minimum of 20%. For new developments, that type of thing. So that's just a number, right?
Well, but then we get into the Mark Eisman situation where we're asking them to update infrastructure and
That's the problem.
The utility may not be able to support those types of improvements.
Yeah, we have the issue is we have limitations in some portions of town where access isn't readily adjacent.
Hey, Scott, didn't we, in that parking lot, stormwater filtration project in the Bayside Cafe there, you know, aren't they putting in two electric charging stations there?
I don't remember. Do you?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
You know,
The NEP project?
yeah, the NEP project, aren't they?
State Park?
Yes, they are.
They
They
are.
are,
They're
okay.
putting,
Yeah.
they're putting in two there, right?
Yeah, they are. That's right.
Okay.
Well, you're talking about that. Are they going to upgrade the electrical into the marina there? Because that electrical is 75 years old and
I
there's,
believe it's included in the project.
and there's no neutral.
They have a lift station there, so you got some kind of power.
Yeah.
so, you know.
Okay, that's probably
I don't wanna get
more
too far.
granular than we need to go, but.
Well, I'm going to get granular one more time. Are we, because it has a fee associated with it, are we saying that if you have a parking space that's required, if you put in a charging station because you're actually spending money, does that need to say, do we need to say that a charging station is not considered a paid parking space?
I would want to go the other way with it and maybe give them a credit of 1.5 or 2 to 1.
Yeah,
I mean, so as an incentive to
as an
encourage.
incentive, yeah,
I'm just looking at the
Do
paid
you guys,
parking.
do you guys like that idea?
yeah.
But would non-electric vehicles park there?
Usually there's a restriction on
It's
it.
usually restricted.
So that's,
Yeah.
I think it's a different category.
Well, right now, the last month, the fastest selling car was a Tesla. The Tesla Model 3 was the fastest selling car in California.
But in our visitor serving area, I mean, often you'll park one place and go to 3 others. So,
Right.
I mean, it's,
And so let's put that parking space can either be on-site or off-site.
That's a good idea.
So they could develop it if they don't have it on.
So I've only ridden in a Tesla once so far, and it seemed like people were moving through those stations.
Right.
So
Because they're
does
faster.
Tesla have a way of managing that so people aren't just camping out in a spot?
Yeah, they don't camp out in the spot. It's
Yeah.
just, it's etiquette. And then it's also, but, okay, here you go. But Tesla's is a proprietary system. Only Teslas can charge on Tesla systems. So there's alternate systems, you know, they're going to clear all that up, but right now, there's like 3 different proprietary systems, and most of them are a CHAdeMO combo.
But most of the ones that the folks that have been talking to us to put them in are the combo systems as well.
Right. And those are the ones we want, unless, and then Tesla can do all, you know, additional. Teslas can charge on the CHAdeMOs. CHAdeMOs can't charge on the Teslas.
So could someone get a parking ticket if they just
Yes.
kept their car there? So I guess that's,
It's $250
The answer.
in certain areas.
well, just, you know, just like you would have a 30-minute max parking anywhere else, you know?
Right.
Right.
And they would be, you know, the proprietors of that system would be incentivized to,
Well, on the paid on the level 3 charging, you're charged for the amount of current you use, and they're also charged per minute basis on how long you stay in that spot. So it's a real incentive to charge and go.
so if I was speaking for the Coastal Commission, I don't think I would see that in this exact same light as paid parking.
But it's helping our greenhouse gas emission standards.
Right.
It's a
So
visitor survey.
keep it out of the
thing, too,
appeal,
They,
Yeah.
For a certain demographic.
keep it out of the coastal area.
Well, it's also, you know, it's all of that pollution coming in, going.
Right, but if we're talking about coastal commission approval for whatever, I mean, just
For parking.
put it somewhere else.
I mean, I
Put it
think
on the
if you
bill.
make the, I don't think probably wouldn't run into a problem with coastal as
Right.
long as we're not saying, hey, 50% of the parking's, you know, we're waiving 50% of your parking to put in a few of these spaces.
Right.
I think it's reasonable, they're probably going to be fine with it because there's benefits to it. Again, there's always balance that has to happen there. I think. I don't know. I mean, we have to give it some thought, honestly.
And something like a 2 parking spot to 1 credit or something like that, whatever you think is feasible on that is.
Well, then there are the unintended consequences of the in lieu fees and
Well, yeah, it's still,
Do we reduce the, well, that's a council decision, I guess, but are the in lieu fees reduced in this,
they're reduced already.
further reduced?
Well, that is expired, actually, at this point. Yeah, so it's back to the original city council resolution that's at 15,000 right now.
Would either one of you guys mind just give me a brief or an explanation on the difference between the new way of, the Senate Bill 743, the vehicles mile, VMT, as opposed to that, what was that, LOS or whatever? Can you just briefly explain the difference there?
You guys can also jump in, but so LOS is based on the congestion at intersections, and vehicle miles traveled is actually based on a calculation of how many vehicles are coming into the city, going out of the city, and within the city based on a particular project. Does that sound about right?
That's correct. So the things that are probably most important to the city are not VMTs. It's LOS, level of service, at our intersections, because that's what you all and all of our citizens are going to experience if we develop the energy site, and at the densities that are suggested in these documents, we're going to have pretty serious traffic impacts at many of our intersections. And it also is bad on the VMT side of thing. The VMT side of thing is a requirement based on recent law that we have to evaluate for CEQA.
Right.
So you have to look at, so that's the greenhouse gas component of it, right? So we have to evaluate it for CEQA. LOS doesn't matter for CEQA anymore, but it matters for us. And so we end up, for projects, having to evaluate both. I think traffic engineers love that, because now they get to get paid for doing two analyses on projects. But I mean, it's the LOS piece that's the thing that affects us the most. Like, from on the ground, this is what's happening in your city, this is what's happening at that intersection, and it tells you the improvements you have to make at those intersections. VMTs don't do any of that.
Okay.
And I would just add too, for level of service. So level of service, an intersection is graded based on the congestion. So it reaches failure when it gets to like F or something like that, or D. But the development problem with LOS is that when you have development occurring in an area, the project that gets developed last tends to take on more of the share of mitigation for traffic impacts, because you already have traffic impacts that are approaching failure. So you have every lot in an area developed, and the last person to build on that lot, well, I mean, it's kind of like Maine and 41, right?
Exactly.
You've got some impacts. Now the last person to the table, they're going to be required to bring that up, and so that's the drawback with LOS, and why some cities are going to VMT, because it's some viewpoints see that as more of an equitable way, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
And it is, I believe, as of 2020, it is required for CEQA, statewide.
Yeah, that's the other big thing.
That's the issue. We're mandated to do that process. It's just, it doesn't necessarily address issues that we're having internally from the circulation standpoint. So we're going to be doing both analysis moving forward, because we need people to understand the actual impacts that are going to happen to the intersections that they drive through every day, because that's what matters to people that live in town, right? And then we'll be doing the other analysis to deal with the CEQA requirements for projects.
Because, it's not, being that we're talking about this circulation element, there's a couple of intersections that border on, like, accidents waiting to happen kind of thing. And one of them is like one you mentioned, 41 in Maine, and the other one I would say is, especially during school, is San Jacinto and Maine. With those, and how we address the pedestrian when one of the things that you changed my mind about roundabouts with the climate action plan, keeping that traffic moving, it makes sense, but when we looking forward and moving forward with these, are we looking at any maybe like tunnels or something underneath highways or something for pedestrian? And how do we separate the pedestrian traffic from these intersections in any of this circular circulation elements? Because I mean, I see that as we develop and as if we progress and get more people, it's going to be, this problem is going to be a bigger problem. So are we looking on ideas?
I don't think tunnel is something that's proposed at this point. Page 387 does have the planned circulation improvements that are recommended if this full build-out did occur. So like you mentioned San Jacinto and Maine, so one of the recommendations there could be a roundabout or traffic signal, to improve both the auto traffic and a signal would obviously help pedestrians as well.
And so in this list, the list of improvements are things that you incorporate into your impact fees, right?
Oh,
and these are things that you put into your capital improvement programs, right? So impact fees pay for capital improvement programs. So as projects happen in these areas, you identify what the cost is, and then what fair share proportionate, what would the fair share proportionate amount be for the applicant to pay related to impacts to that intersection from their project. I'm going to put a hotel in at the intersection of 41 in Atascadero, right, or 41 in Maine, because we have an application for one there. They're going to be looking at traffic impacts to the, they're going to have to pay, their proportionate share of traffic impact fees to that intersection. Unfortunately, the way we set up our traffic impact fees in the past was sort of like, okay, well, we're not going to be putting any of these new improvements. You just have to pay a sort of a minimal amount. I think moving forward, we're going to be changing that.
Yeah.
These minimal amount, I sort of underplayed that, but that's effectively what we did. You're just buying into the existing transportation system, and you're not buying into what the transportation system looks like when you put these improvements in.
Right.
And so this is what this does. This says, hey, city, stop doing that, and then come up with some costing numbers for this, and so you can improve your impact fee numbers. So this is, again, the general plan covers all of the things that cities do, so there's a lot of action items that come out of this. This is one of them.
Yeah, and see, bouncing off that, Scott, another one is like do the hotels and stuff, we, not only the circulation element, but, kind of like what you were saying, is the last person developing is kind of share that burden. Well, our infrastructure, is getting pushed to the limits too. So those are the kind of impact fees that, historically have been just passed down to the ratepayer. But I think that
you have to buy into this. So, for sewer and water, you have to buy into the system. You have to pay your proportionate share of that. And that's, part of, what some of that, what some of the One Water plan is looking at is that, and we may end up with increased impact fees out of that. We're in it, and we're moving forward. We're getting ready to do an impact, or a fee study and cost allocation plan, so that will help with some of that too.
Okay,
so it's nice that a lot of these things are happening right now.
Yeah, it's in parallel.
It's not like we're like, hey, you need to do this, but we're not going to be doing that forever. I mean, we're actually doing a lot of these things right now, which should make you feel a little bit better, because a lot of times that's not how it happens, but we have all these things kind of moving at the same time. So a couple of years down the road, we'll have these things in place and, sort of be up to date with things. And then you get those plans in place and you keep them up to date. It's the idea. So
yeah, so kind of playing catch up right now.
we are a little bit, yes.
It's a question about that. So, like a hotel, and they're going to burden the infrastructure, particularly water and sewer. Do they pay some sort of pro rata share? That is, there's 5,000 buildings, and now it's the 5,001 building, and that's their percentage? Or could we do something? I'm thinking on the order of, well, you as a late arrival are the one that's really stressing. I'm overstating this, but the later arrival is the one that really overstresses the system and causes the need for immediate expansion, and somehow is causing a greater expense. And that's, you know what I'm saying? So that it becomes a little more progressive that way?
So in some instances, you reach the tipping point with the project, and so the infrastructure has to be put in place. A lot of times, and sometimes you'll say, okay, well, project, you're going to have to do that implementation for that replacement of the sewer line because the sewer line's at capacity. All right, so they would have to put it in, and then you'd have a reimbursement agreement, and then projects that came afterwards would help reimburse them for the cost of the outlay for the entirety of that project, because really they should only be responsible for their fair share portion. And so that's why it's important to come up with what these projects look like, and then attach a cost to them, and then increase them by CPI or ENR over time, so that you have accurate costs, and that your impact fees reflect the cost to actually implement those improvements. And so commercial pays more than residential. So residential impact fees, for water and sewer are less than they are for commercial development.
Yeah.
So they pay more. So what the point is, it's a bit of a tiered system, and yes, hotels would pay more than, say, your single-family home, your multifamily development, that type of thing.
Well, but it's not quite what I'm getting at, because
Okay.
it's close. But I mean, that's an easy case where the development requires an addition to the infrastructure, and clearly they should be. But in a situation where it doesn't really require an addition to the infrastructure, but by common sense, we know that if there's a little bit more capacity in the structure, you're occupying that little bit more of capacity, which is that much less for the next person that comes. It's somehow like the later people to join the system are taxing it greater, and I'm just left with this intuition that maybe we should be requiring more contributions from the later arrivals to the system. And I don't know anything more about it than that, but.
Well, I would push back on that, Joseph, in the sense that the newer arrivals have had more of the benefit of the system, so they should be paying an equal share too. I mean, so it's kind of like, everybody wants to blame the last guy in for crowding the bus, but each of those people on the bus has an equal share of creating that crowd. So
Yeah.
so the people that were on the bus before have been riding it with their arms all stretched out, kind of a thing. So I don't know. I don't know if you can push all of the costs onto the last person developing it.
No.
They should pay their fair share, but they shouldn't pay. I don't think they should pay more.
And of course, certainly not all the cost. But I'm just. It's in the definition. What is the fair share of the last one to join the party? I guess that's what.
And so that's how. And you determine that when you go through the analysis of what the improvements are necessary to the system. We have a system that's being maintained. Well, you prefer that it was being maintained over time. You prefer that the city, you prefer that the city didn't, make the choice to never raise water rates for 20 years, and then operate the water fund at a deficit of almost $1 million by the time they raised the funds. I mean, that is not a sustainable way to do business, and you're not getting that money in, so you're not having that money so you can maintain the system, and so the system ends up deteriorating over time, right? So there's one of the reasons we're doing the One Water Plan is to evaluate all of our water and wastewater infrastructure to see what that cost of is to fix that. When we're done with that, that's going to equate to new impact fees. And so it just, in many respects, what you say, Commissioner Graffia, is we're going to be upping the cost for new development because we're going to have a new cost. We're going to know what that new cost is, and it's going to be distributed through development moving forward. And so it's likely that that's what ends up happening. That's just the nature of the beast. When you have a really good idea of the deficiencies in your system, you need to identify what those are, and then ratepayers are paying for some of it because they're using it and they continue to use it. And then new development comes on, you have to buy your share of the system, and it has to be an equitable share. We can't just charge one person more than another. You have to identify what those are, and then you know what those costs are, and you distribute them evenly to development as it comes forward. And that's kind of how that works. The number will be, like I said, because we're going to be identifying new maintenance, repair, and improvement needs, those costs are going to go up. And so on into the future, as development comes forward, they're going to be paying more than development pays today. And that's not just because of CPI or ENR. It's going to be because we have more infrastructure needs that are not accounted for today, but that we're going to know not in the too distant future.
Okay, Scott, to get back to page 3-87, on policy 4.2, paid parking, everybody's favorite subject.
87?
Where we at?
Which page?
97.
397.
397, I'm sorry.
No problem.
It's hard to read that. Okay, I think we need to, towards the end of that, it says to improve, the city may seek a coastal development permit to establish paid parking spaces with reasonable rates in appropriate places. Some of the revenue would serve as a dedicated funding source to improve and enhance coastal access. Either instead of the coastal access or in plus the coastal access, I think we need something in the way of like streetscape improvement or downtown business district improvement, so that funding source can go.
This is a coastal, it's a coastal policy, and I think we have an implementation one that speaks directly to that.
I think it should be wherever you're parking, that area is improved. So if it's downtown, the downtown area is improved. If it's Embarcadero, the Embarcadero area is improved. I mean, we shouldn't be funding the Embarcadero with downtown paid parking.
Right, but the Embarcadero gets harbor funds that the downtown doesn't get. And so if they're willing to share their harbor fund,
Well, also, I think this is probably a city council type of decision.
I think so.
We're kind of getting.
But
We've had some preliminary conversations with coastal staff about paid parking, and that's been a bit of a touchy issue because they, Coastal Act, it's maximizing public access to the coast. So they want to make sure that by putting in paid parking, you're not, inconsistent with the Coastal Act. So that's why you see that language. It's specifically,
so maybe we need an "and" in there.
Yeah.
So because
Or
of
maybe we need to identify it in the implementation section,
Yeah.
because we could separate it out that way, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that might be the implementation section is what it tells us what we're going to go do, and so we should. I think the idea is
Okay.
maybe it should be allocated in the areas. That's probably a good idea in the areas where it's collected.
Right.
And we kind of have those areas broken out, so that would probably be
Yeah.
a really difficult thing.
Because we need a funding source for for streetscape improvements, and that's how South San Luis developed their whole business district.
So we're going to have more concrete benches and stuff.
Oh yeah, concrete trash cans and
We can have parking districts.
Effectively, from the how we collect it, because typically what you're doing is you have the little machine where you go in and pay, and it covers the spaces in that section of the street. And so, from allocation standpoint, it's not a big deal, but it would be like whatever's left over after you pay enforcement staff.
yeah.
Well, as I understand it, those costs are, with the technologies are being minimized with, San Luis is doing a drive-by kind of situation where they're enforcing it more with cameras and things like that. Well, anyway, I digress.
There's several different systems that you can use. You have the system that's at Cal Poly where you can have the app that'll tell you where there's a vacant parking space.
Right.
Some of it. So that also tells you when somebody's in the space and hasn't been paid, that type of thing. So it's it can tell you where your violators are and where you go find them if you put those type of systems.
I think it's going to be much more cost effective to put in paid parking.
Yeah.
So, and we need a funding source for business district improvements. So, okay, are we done with this section? Can we move on to noise, F3, 3F-noise? So that would be 399.
Okay, the noise element, we start with an overview and the approach to resiliency. And then we have several sections, first being measuring noise and vibration, noise sources, standards, and land use compatibility, community noise survey, noise exposure and mitigation for specific locations, noise reduction strategies, and then the key issues for this element are sensitive land uses, land use compatibility, mobile noise sources, and temporary noise sources. And then we have goals and policies as well.
Okay, a lot of this is driven by new state requirements. So,
Yeah, so this is one of the elements that is not a coastal issue element, so it's pretty technical, pretty much certain analysis is required to come up with this element. But in terms of the goals and policies, there may be things that we want to discuss, but I don't know, unless you see issues with the rest of the text, it's a little less subjective.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm thumbing through this, page 3-106, all of those examples are great. I just don't know that we want to use one church as an example and not another. I wonder if it'd be better just to strike that. Put Morro Bay Assembly of God as an example. I don't know. What are the thoughts?
they're noisier. Their choir's a lot louder.
Right.
Yeah, I agree.
Two and not the rest. I don't. Maybe we just put places of worship in general.
Their songs are louder, I don't know.
And
I can tell you this. I hear the high school from about 2 miles away. They can shut off. I heard whistles today.
I hear
Whistles.
we hear the play-by-play.
It's like,
Can't hear it from my house.
So probably the general comment would be also, is it important for any reason to specifically mention certain examples or not?
The sea lions.
I hear them. I mean, it's amazing.
That would be the opposite of a sensitive.
Well, the measurable part I think is important, but the biggest thing that I was trying to scratch my head about here was, I know architecturally there are codes about building-related noises internal to the structure. The biggest thing that concerns me about this whole thing is those 900-some people we think are going to end up living in the downtown in residential things are going to be exposed to a level of noise compatibility issues that we're not used to thinking about. I mean, there are some folks living downtown now, but I think as the downtown intensifies, as the residential use downtown intensifies, that's where I can see the biggest conflict coming here. And if we think we're covered with what we have here, because this is very technical stuff, it's measurable stuff.
And also,
But it seems like the residential in a downtown area is pretty easy to mitigate with the types of materials in the building.
I'm
SVC
thinking
ratings of
more
the
like
windows and
the ambient noise from the restaurants and bars. Not to pick on anybody, but I remember when the siren came in, we were talking about the exterior stuff there. And I'm just thinking if we have another half dozen of those types of enterprises and we have 900 people living downtown, that's where the zone of sensitivity is going to come in. So I didn't know if it was something we needed to put in here if we talked about those noise-sensitive land uses, if we wanted to say something like residential development in the downtown or residential development associated with commercial uses, so that it's putting something out in front saying if you want to develop the commercial with residential, we're flagging that we're looking out for the residents that are going to live there as well as the perimeter neighbors.
And we're talking mitigation through building materials, right?
Not necessarily. It could be these.
I almost feel like that belongs more in the noise land use compatibility, or maybe in both places. And then I believe there are also more detailed noise regulations. Is it in the zoning or in the municipal code in general?
Well, I wouldn't want to do anything that discouraged mixed use.
No, that's the thing. I want it to be good. Because I know Slow had trouble. They were talking about some exterior beer gardens or something when the one brewery was trying to move, and they were talking about performance. To me, it's about the nature of performance. because you get these weird, it's like Commissioner Lure and I, we have that weird laminate flow that goes up the hill from the high school, and we literally hear amazing amounts of stuff from the high school.
Yeah.
It's,
You know, and then, so on top of that is the, speakers that drive,
Oh, yeah.
the Sonic.
ah,
You know, it has the potential, that has the potential to travel miles. Just that to the car, I remember. And then also, hearing, if you're up on the bluff, hearing them calling out orders, in the fish and chips place. So we need to have I don't know where we put that, but we need to have that so that there's, minimal decibels leaving the building sites. But I think we have that in our noise ordinance and, in the city, but I think it just needs to be reinforced.
and I think the residents take on a certain amount of, they have to lower their threshold of nuisance sound. I mean, I lived in an urban area for about 10 years, and you do have to be more accepting of certain kinds of sound sometimes, but I just want to make sure we get it right in the downtown. And it seems to me like the technical aspects are covered here. There's just some of those use sensitivity things I think it'd be nice to flag, say be careful, especially careful.
What comes to mind, I had a friend of mine that lived next to this one house, and one of the things that I thought was, I didn't realize how loud it is these central vacuum things, and the exit was right in front. And that thing, like somebody's vacuuming their house for like 2 hours or something, and it's like, it is a concern. The other thing is, that's one, and I don't know if this is in the right area to address that. The other thing is, I remember when I was growing up, I lived along the 10 freeway. We just had a fence there for a while, and then they put a wall, and it really made a difference, for noise coming into that area. So here we got Highway 1, and Caltrans has cut a bunch of trees down on the other side, on the beach side, and so I think that, are we in any way addressing some of those, as there's more traffic, maybe more electric cars won't be so noisy then, but I mean, are we looking at that at all? Along the highway,
You mean, you have policy, the policy, direction provided in this section, breaks it down by health and safety in the environment that you're in, then by transportation-related noise impacts, and then related to construction activities, special events, nuisance noise that that's covered in our municipal code or the noise ordinance, those types of things. So I guess what I would say is I need to look at the implementation section. Because that kind of tells you, do we have policies in here to deal with the issues that you're raising, or do we not? That's kind of where.
I think the sound walls along the highway came up at GPAC, and I believe the response was that's mostly a Caltrans jurisdiction. But I don't think we had anything specific to that.
That kind of takes, Highway 1 is a highly scenic roadway. I don't think we want to put walls up. I don't.
Well, maybe not walls, but something. You're looking at a chain link fence and a bunch of cars. You don't have to have them very high, I don't think. But, it could be pretty cool. You could have murals all the way down, but...
I think it'd be great to change out that chain link fence, but I don't want to see any blockage of the views, of the view corridors off of that. That's...
Just mirror with the trash bags. There's many of those since we got rid of the trash bags.
And there's also going to be active measures in residential developments that for noise cancellations.
Yeah.
It calls for all that, talks about installation requirements, complying with building code things in here. I mean, it talks, I mean, your installation requirements, all those types of things are picked up in the implementation section.
Yeah, it looks
that's kind
like
of where I was going, is that
NOI 13, it doesn't say sound wall, but it does say encourage
5-8,
Caltrans and
5-18.
county engineer
Implementation.
to
Starting there.
incorporate noise reduction methods, including innovative noise reduction strategies in the design of new and modified roads and highways.
You know, the biggest noise creation is the tires on the road. So by changing the pavement structure, you can change the noise level of that's created there. So.
Yeah, like mud terrains.
Okay, are we good on noise then, guys?
You know, I had a question. I'm recalling the house that, the development next to Casa de Flores. And I remember there was a sound issue there, and it was mitigated because they essentially said, well, the people can stay in the back patio and not in the front patio, and they'll be safe from damage. So it's a question, really. So builders can build outdoor areas that are technically unsafe as long as they provide an alternative that's safe. That's kind of like the logic.
So correct. So if you have, so one of the issues, and a couple of you might experience this with the high school apparently, you may have doors, windows, balconies, roof overhangs that catch the noise coming up the hill at you. That's why you hear it. I remember vividly being in one of the houses next door to Dismo City Hall when I first started working there. I walked in to do a final, and I was standing on the balcony facing the highway, trying to talk to the developer to do the sign off, and we couldn't even have a conversation. And all they said was, "Hey, look, you can walk inside. We have really great insulation." And I was like, "But we live at the beach." Anyway, so side note. Sorry, I went there. Vivid memory.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you need to have an area that's not subjected to that noise level. I think it's 60 dBA or whatever below. You have to have an outside activity area that's not subject to that, or designed so that it can be mitigated to a level below that inside that area. You can have others that aren't, but you at least have to have one of those outdoor areas if you're going to have outdoor areas that meets that requirement. And you'll have mitigation measures that go along with any sound study that you do. We did one for that location that you're talking about, and it said, yeah, well, that one might not meet it, the other one does, and so that way you have one area where you're not subjected to that, and that's acceptable.
It just strikes me as curious that you can knowingly build a habitat that's unsafe, relying on the common sense of the inhabitants not to spend too much time there, but nevertheless, it's odd that you can knowingly build something that's a health hazard. That's my only thought.
Well, but then you're putting headphones in your ears that are, 95 decibels, and wow. Millennials, sorry.
Jesse
And also the noise.
But see, the distinction I'd make is that there's no discretion. The headphones, you choose to turn up the volume, fine. But
And even
house,
Highway
you
1
either-
is not 405 or the 410 where,
Oh, no, I know. And it's just, I'm just
Yeah.
calling, it's something to think about. What's the theory behind that?
Yeah, I mean, it becomes, it's probably less of an issue here because of the traffic volumes we have on 1. They tend to trail off, at non-peak hours, and so it's probably not as bad as it otherwise could be. If you're on Highway 101, most of the day is going to have decibel levels that are at that level, and so you definitely want to make sure that you have those areas that are outside of that. Here, those areas might, for a portion of the day, have that issue, like the house that you were talking about.
Yeah.
A portion of the day, a couple hours of the day, probably is going to have an issue, but the rest of the time it's not going to.
Yeah.
And that just has to do with the volumes and the proximity to the highway. So probably less of an issue for us here because of that factor. But again, I mean, you have to do the analysis to prove that. I'm not going to say that's 100% the case. It's just sort of my experience with it, having worked now along Highway 1 and worked previously along Highway 101. It was often a lot more difficult. The mitigation measures that came along with the noise studies were fairly rigorous, and prior to current times, insulation requirements and window types, I think, weren't as noise canceling as they are now, and so it was oftentimes you were talking about a dramatic increase in construction costs related to those things. Now it's a little bit better because noise insulation, in construction products is a lot better than it used to be.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to our green print intro for 4.1 and 4A.
I don't know. Let's see where we can get done.
So moving on to the green print, which we did introduce a little bit earlier at the last meeting. But again, this is the set of elements that focus a little bit more on conservation and natural resources. We do explain I believe in the introduction, that there is a lot of overlap between the blueprint and the green print, and they are not exclusively, one set is not exclusively focused on conservation and the other on development or economic development, but we did group them that way. So this one, the introduction has an organization section and then how to use the green print, and it includes conservation element, the open space element, the public safety element, and the community well-being element. So do we have any comments on this section?
Conceptually, I want to go back to some of the citizen comments, because I share, and I think I shared last time, I'm very sympathetic to this idea that the environmentally sensitive habitat, I would think you want to have that as something in this first introduction. I mean, it shows up on 410. So you've got to go more pages than that. I mean, to me, I don't know technically in terms of the planning document, is it better called out as something that is part of conservation or open space? And technically it's not open space the way we typically think of open space, but I would like to urge we look at something more, advocating for it as a thing. It's a use that we don't use like other things, and that we do prize here. And it just strikes me that if you don't say those things up front, it always seems like a nuisance. And I firmly believe it's an attractor in the future for development rather than something that gets in the way of development. And I just wish there was a way to somehow, since we're going to diagrammatically show it with our overlay districts, say that in Morro Bay, the process has informed that we raise this to a level that we want people to be aware of it, and that we see as a legacy of the place that we live in, that we protect and try to enhance. And it just seems to me to be and it takes it from a footnote into a thing, a little bit more overtly.
So it is in the conservation element. In terms of the introduction, it's, at least the way it's been written so far, it's pretty efficient. It doesn't get into a lot of kind of placing value like you were just doing, so it might be more appropriate in the ESHA section in the conservation element. Open to discussion on that.
I'd like to just kind of bounce off what Michael was saying and totally agree. And one of the things that I feel, if we're looking at this into the future, I think it's important that we not only recognize, it's one thing to conserve, but we need to get into the mindset of restoration, not just conservation. Because, ocean health right now, the ocean, if we look at the ocean, for instance, as a patient that's in need of a care plan, okay, like you have a patient, you give them a care plan. You look at the ocean and it's in need of a care plan. It's more than just status quo. We need a restorative element to it. And so, people say, well, like if you have a perspective from a developer's perspective, it's like, well, you're not allowing me this. But, from a city standpoint, it's a value. We value all our environmentally sensitive area because potentially, and in the near future, it will become not only an attraction, but a commodity for the city. So I would like to see right into the introduction a statement of how we're going to, not stay level, but restore. We turn it around. We're going to have a restorative element. In other words, as I'm just looking at the big picture. As development is going to encroach on ESHA, that development has to have a restorative element to that ESHA, not just to. It's not enough just to like put a line and say we won't encroach on it, but we need to have. There was I'll give you an example. You remember that project, Scott, that was over right there by that by the loading ramp, but it was that lady's house. They were developing that house that was right. I can't remember. It was. Yeah, the boat loading ramp.
Oh yeah.
And then
Gotcha. Thailand's parking lot.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking at this, and there was some controversy with some of the neighbors. But at the end of the day, one of the things that really resonated with me is the lady, the property owner. She was innovative on her drainage plan. Innovative on her water catchment, really cool stuff. And then walking through, so even though she wasn't next to ESHA, but that's the kind of stuff that I think that we should not only like encourage, but it should be like a part of our policy. That especially as you get closer to ESHA, if you want to even approach it, those buffer zones are areas where that restoration process can happen. I relate it to for me, I relate it to like fluid dynamics, right? The boundary layers is where it all happens, you know what I mean? And when you look at it that way, you say, okay, you got your flow, but that's where it's really important. And I think that if we conceptually just, theoretically look at it that way, maybe we can have somebody with the more eloquently can. I think
I get what you're saying. So what I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners and from the community is basically saying they would rather see a bold statement at the beginning of this introduction that very clearly states our desire to be environmentally conscious.
Well, it's more than just environmentally conscious. It's in acting. California right now is a forerunner, not only in the United States, because compared to everybody else there, but also in the world. It's just going forward with carbon reduction, greenhouse gas reductions, and trying to set policy that is forward thinking. And I think that we have an opportunity with our general plan and LCP update to be a leader in that
right,
implementation.
So this document's going to be guiding development and guiding people's decisions on how to proceed.
Yeah,
so
and
insofar it has to do that. But I also hear what you're saying is that we also want to state our desire to be environmentally conscious very, very clearly, very boldly, very prominently. Is that what I'm hearing you guys say?
Yeah, and it's more than that. It's just like recognizing that our areas in there's our area, our little whole Morro Bay, this little estuary and this little, sand spit area. This is a treasured and needs not only protection, but it needs restoration because
Right,
everything
but-
around is.
Right, but this document, we can't go into that deep of a narrative. We have to be very concise and very informative.
Yeah, but
Help
we
me out
could.
here.
We actually could. We could go into there with by changing certain words by saying, hey, we're not just like the word sustainability. Well, sustainability, if you have cancer, that's not good enough. We need to turn it around, okay? And so we want a restorative.
So, Richard, what I hear you saying is instead of conservation, maybe say conservation and conservation and restoration, or
So I'm gonna pull this back one step and address first what Commissioner Lucas said.
Okay.
So there's a desire, what I heard Commissioner Lucas say, hey, your intro to the green print doesn't say anything about ESHA. The policy as it stands right now, we have the conservation element that deals with a number of things, including environmentally sensitive habitat. We're not changing that. It needs to do that. But to add that into the conversation in the introduction, we can put a reference into it under the conservation section because that's where it's housed. So there's a conservation paragraph right on the front, and we can make a reference to it and add a sentence or two about that. So it's up front.
Okay.
Okay? Does that make sense? All right. And then in the conservation policies, there is discussion about restoration as it relates to development, and then there's implementation policies that do that too. So are there inadequacies there that you're seeing?
I think
or
what
am
I'm hearing everybody say is just more prominently earlier in the document and maybe a little bit stronger language.
So like I said, I'm saying we're going to put it in the. So we have the introduction. Introduction usually tells you, hey, this is the stuff that's going to come after it, including speaking to a specific element, our conservation element, which is where ESHA policies are found. I think it needs to live there, and we shouldn't pull policy out of there. But I think it's fine to put a reference in the introduction underneath that conservation paragraph. I mean, it's page 4.2, and we can add that. We can add a reference in there, and then you'll get to review it when we bring back the document to you.
so Scott, we could easily say the conservation element addresses the use and preservation, preservation and restoration of natural resources to improve the environmental quality of Morro Bay for years to come.
Yes, we could do that.
I was.
Good enough, Richard?
Well, yeah, but then you say the words, and then how do we? Then it's the implementation. But yeah, for starters,
Yeah.
okay.
Probably our policy that's most specific to what you were just talking about, Commissioner Sadowski, is C1.11, and that is on
Habitat restoration,
C1.
page 4-14.
Or what?
414.
I think what and I've heard this from the public also, is a very strong statement at the beginning of this green type of or ecologically, I'm not sure of the word I'm looking for, but section 4A. So I mean, at the beginning of this, they want to see it strongly, boldly pronouncing our intent to be on the forefront of this type of.
I don't think we have time to wordsmith this in this venue, but I would say the first sentence should be something like, visitors and residents are drawn to Morro Bay because of its natural setting and environmental elements.
There you
The
go.
conservation element addresses blah, 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 including an environmentally sensitive habitat recognition, and those things are not fixed. I mean, the environmentally sensitive habitat has a chance to change. We can be identifying new ones as well as preserving ones that are existent, and I think we need to talk about how that happens as well. I
It
think
tells us to do that, and the implementation policies tell us to do that.
Right. I think they want to see it
So
beginning.
the whole idea behind this is to have a living doc. Our existing LCP tells us as we find new environmentally sensitive habitats, we're supposed to map them. If you want to know how many times the city's done that since we adopted the original general plan and LCP? 0.
Big donut, huh?
So, but now we have GIS capabilities, and I can literally walk to our GIS person and say, hey, this new house over here on Beachcomber identified environmentally sensitive habitat.
Yeah.
And here's where it's at. Go put it on the map, and then we will republish a map that shows where that's at, and so people will know that it's there. And we'll probably show it, and I was talking to Cindy about this earlier today, and we'll probably show it in a red outline so that people know, and we'll have part of the key will be, this is not an adopted portion of the LCP until we run it through coastal. And then every couple of years, we'll update the map as we send LCP amendments through coastal. We'll send those with it, and they'll be updated real time and be certified. But in the interim, people will know that there's environmentally sensitive habitat there. And the reason that's important is so you don't do what I talked to you about before and have the gotcha. That's not good. People should know when the development's coming that there's ASHA there, and you need to do the studies up front because it's terrible from the seat that I sit in and the seat that Cindy sits in. When somebody walks in, they think they have everything that they need to submit an application, and they walk in and they're like, here, I meet all your development standards and we got everything going, and we're like, yeah, that's great. But guess what? You're in an area where environmentally sensitive habitat exists. We're like, well, where was I supposed to find that?
Yeah.
There's no way for them really to identify that that was the case, and so then you just stuck them back, 5 months in going down that road. And so it's important for us to put it out there up front, and that's the intent. That's what intent behind the policies here, and it does pick it up from previous language in the LCP, but that's how we're going to implement it, and that's what we want it to be out front. I mean, that's the intent behind the policies in here, so people understand that it's there, understand what's expected. The neighbors in the neighborhoods, the folks that live in the neighborhoods where the development's happening know that's supposed to happen, and so do the people that are coming in and doing development in those neighborhoods.
And that's fine for the.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, that's fine for the developers who know how to read this document. I'm talking about the people that live here and want this document to represent them. They want to see it earlier and bolder and more prominent.
And if you're looking for a dramatic statement, and it seems like that's what the map is very impressive. So I mean, what about something like 18% of the landmass of Morro Bay is designated ESHA, and no citizen lives more than a half a mile from one of those ESHA areas? That sort of, in a sentence or two, says sort of graphically how lucky we are to be here.
And also, in the first paragraph of introduction, we should recognize the point that the natural resources or natural beauty of this area is a major economic driver of this.
That's right.
Of the city, because that's what people come here for.
Yeah, I really think it's some of it is it's just because I do a lot of wordsmithing on all sorts of things for myself as well as things at my other place of employment, and it's things like just on that 410 at the bottom, near the bottom of the first paragraph, it says these areas should be protected against habitat disruption by strategically siting development and facilities so they will not interfere or degrade. And that's where we might want to put some sentence, some phrase in about enhancing it.
Yeah.
And as opposed to don't mess with it, no, enhance it. And that helps you too, because we said in the beginning that's going to attract people. That's what it's an attractor here. So I think it still has some of the phrasing that just suggests a code of deal with this footnote. We want to raise it up so that it's actually affirmational that we don't want these things messed with. We want them better than you found them. That map is so beautiful. Well, not the colors. C2. If you want to know everything about Morro Bay, it's on C2. That stream of dunescapes crossed by the coastal coastal mountain streams with the rock out there. That's the entire concept map of the city. And then you see the neighborhoods nestled in between those things and crossing them. And every major problem we have in the city environmentally comes from those edges where we nest up against those things. And it doesn't matter which one it is. You can pick any of them, and it's got a story behind it. We were just talking about the little sliver lot there that's the little tiny piece where Main Street crosses Route 1. So every one of these things has a really unique story that if you've been around here long enough, you can talk about all the problems of the developers that have impacted those things, from the people, the paper streets and the dunescapes, to the people who've ruined ESHAs on their property after they've been given orders of how to proceed, to, the Cerrito Peak Eagle Rock thing that we talked about earlier tonight. This is a beautiful map to talk about the story of the city of Morro Bay, and it's taught through the ESHA. So I think it's worth making it big.
I agree.
Yeah. So it's just a matter, I think it's a good wordsmithing, make it stronger. Okay, I have an issue on 4-14, policy C1-1.4, where we talk about, eelgrass protection. It says continue to address and mitigate eelgrass impacts on a project-by-project basis using implementation guidelines from California Eelgrass Mitigation Policy to promote eelgrass growth in the bay. I think we're missing the boat, no pun intended, by project basis. I think we should, instead of continue to address eelgrass mitigation by project basis, we should set up an eelgrass mitigation bank to restore eelgrass habitats and mitigate mitigate impacts through additional eelgrass habitats.
Yeah, implementation C12, page 5-23
Okay.
says consider establishing an eelgrass mitigation bank. NEP is looking at that, and when I was talking to Lexi Bell, said that it's probably not feasible from an economic standpoint in the city. They said we might do better as instead of mitigation bank, meaning you're buying into it, that when we have restoration projects, we don't have them restore on the lease site. We have them restore in an area where we know it to be doing better.
Right.
And so I think they're looking at something along those lines. And so NEP is looking at developing policy along those and working with the subcommittee of the Harbor Advisory Board that's doing that. And it seems like that's where they've come up with, because it didn't sound like it was going to. This is what she told me, and I didn't dig super deep into it, so I apologize for that. But so when they started looking at the economics of it, it probably wasn't going to work that way. But they could be, instead of having them continue to plant eelgrass in an area where we don't know whether it's going to, thrive or it can live, and so then there's never an end to that mitigation. They just keep wagon training and replanting because they never get the amount of eelgrass established in that location. That locate some areas where they know it'll grow, and then say, hey, why don't you put your eelgrass over there, and you're going to have your patch of eelgrass, and you're going to keep doing that same thing there, but you have a better chance of it moving forward. And so it sounded to me like they were going to be working on policy to do that.
Okay.
So I think this policy
that?
covers
Okay.
that, I think. I think that's a different form of bank, but not like what you're thinking, like, I pay NEP and they go plant. It sounded like they didn't think that was going to be a sustainable program for them to implement, and they were looking along these other lines that it might be a little more strategic and might help out the individuals that are required to do this a little bit more, as opposed to them just going forever.
So what I would see is any development along the Embarcadero or along the harbor front, whether they have existing eelgrass on their site or not, should be required to contribute to.
So that's what the NEP is saying, is that is not a financially viable solution here, because we don't have the amount of development potential here to pay for it.
Okay.
And so, I think what Lexi's position was, okay, I'm going to get the money, and this isn't going to pay for us to do it. You're not going to generate enough cash. And so I don't know where they're eventually going to end up, because it didn't sound like they were done working through it, but it sounded like more along the lines of, we could help you identify areas where it can grow, and then so the projects that are required to mitigate can go mitigate over there, because we just don't have enough lease sites on the Embarcadero to make it viable.
Okay.
So that's what I took away from the conversation with her anyway.
Okay.
So that was literally a week ago.
Oh.
I mean, I just talked to her. It was sort of edifying on that part of things, because I thought they were going down that road, but it sounded like that wasn't going to work.
So this seems like a excellent project for, for grant funding from Fisheries Restoration Council or the
Strategic growth.
Dynergy or even
in partnerships with Cal Poly, NEP partners with them on things too. So there's a lot of opportunities to do various things. I think that's what that subcommittee with the NEP and that with the subcommittee of the Harbor Advisory Board is trying to come up with. And I know they've been looking at a lot of different options, and it sounded like, the economics of it wasn't going to make sense. Like, oh, we're just going to hand you some money, and the NEP's like, so we're going to be responsible for making that happen? And knowing how much money we would get on a regular or annual basis wasn't going to be very much. And she was like, well, that's not going to pay for the program. Yeah. So I think maybe the idea was they could come up with their program, identify areas where it could happen, and that might be the
So there wasn't any funds available from the fishing license sales? California fishing license sales?
I'm not sure. Again,
Yeah.
we get in a real long conversation about it. It was just she told me that, and I was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
It seems like there should be some county money there coming from, all the runoff and the development in the Chorro Valley. And, I don't know. It seems like there should be some money there, but.
One thing, it's 10 o'clock.
So we should probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that if it's, this section, I think we still need to talk about, you know what I mean, and then maybe not close it out, because I know of a few people that are really interested in this one, and one of them, I'm just going to throw this out, Scott, in the map C2. There's, first of all, the aquatic resource and wetlands habitat. Right at the causeway there's no wetlands there. There's
Is that eelgrass?
that's where the sea otters feed over there by by where the
I think
seaweed is,
I think that's what that is.
Yeah.
Is it identifying an eelgrass?
It's identifying, I think, aquatic resource and wetland habitat. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is there's eelgrass all along where the lease site is that we're dealing with, right? But
We don't have a bunch of it, and it's transitory. So mapping eelgrass locations at this point, given how dramatically the eelgrass numbers have reduced in the bay, doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
so,
And-
but I
and
mean,
that scale,
if you
too.
put it, just put a whole line there, and then even though it's sporadic, it
Diagram.
identifies that there is eelgrass there, maybe even though it's sporadic.
Migratory eelgrass.
So what the policies in here, deal with anytime you're doing development along the bay, you're required to do the studies. I mean, it says, hey, you got to go. The entirety of this area, may or may not have eelgrass. The camp requires the studies as well. So I mean, we have a whole regulatory program that's developed for it, and they have to comply with it. And we've picked that up in here and said, hey, yeah, you got to do that. And part of that is doing the biological studies that go along with it. It tells you to go do that in here, and then it has the implementation section that tells you to go do it, and then it's pushed out into the zoning code as well. So I mean, I think we have it just about everywhere you can have it. Putting lines on maps that don't actually reflect things that are there doesn't really do anything for us. That's the thing we have with the map now. It outlines things on there that don't mean anything in the context of policy, which is a terrible map because it leads you to believe something special is happening there. Nothing special is happening there. And people think, oh, there's special protection for what's right there. There's no special protection based on our current maps in those locations. We don't want to do things like that again. That's a bad thing to carry forward. You want policies that are specific to the things that are on your maps, and you have policies that deal with things that are in the water, and that's the eelgrass policies, and you're required to do the biological studies anytime you're there, period. So we have that issue's covered, but to put things on a map that don't actually exist in those locations is not a good practice, in my opinion. And is the issue that we have right now with the maps. People are looking at them, and one of the reasons people were concerned about the maps, like, you're removing it. Like, yes, it doesn't mean anything on the map, but people think you're losing. So that's why I said at the beginning of the meeting, I said, I'm happy to put that back on the main land use map if it makes people comfortable, because it's in the zoning map as well. It'll just be the same layer. It's fine. And so we can remove that. And there's no policy change that happens here in doing that. It just shows it up on that other map. Sort of consistent with the map here, right? So that should hopefully make people feel more comfortable that we're not trying to remove protections, because we're not. We're actually trying to make it more specific and more clear. That's the intent behind what we're doing through here. So,
Okay, Scott, we're past 10 o'clock here.
okay, so we should probably call the ball on this, and before you call this.
No.
So are you going to be able to do the meeting on the 4th? Okay, so you're going to be continuing this item to our meeting on the 4th, on September 4th. So again, this is an ongoing public hearing. You're going to be continuing again to that meeting, and we have one other item on that agenda. I think one.
Okay.
And so we'll be continuing this at that meeting at our regularly scheduled time. That's all.
Do we need a motion for a continuation on this, or is this?
Yeah, that would be appropriate.
Okay.
I move we continue.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to continue this meeting to September 4th,
Day after Labor Day.
day after Labor Day. Okay. Okay, so any discussion on that? Okay, call the question. please.
Voice is all good. You can just go all in favor.
Okay, voice call, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Passes by. Thank you for that.
5-0. Okay, new business, none. Unfinished business, none. Planning commissioners' comments, none. Community director's comments.
Done.
Okay, we'll adjourn to the next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting at the Veterans Memorial Building at 209 Surf Street on September 4th at our regular meeting time, which is 6 p.m. Thanks for everybody.